Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. And it's a very special episode for you this week. It is the Eliteserien 2023 Season Preview Podcast, the special show, yearly show. We bring you every single team in the league. We look at each team. And my good friend and colleague here, Steve Wyss, will predict all you need to know about the Eliteserien. He's going to tell you everything you need to know and then make his predictions. Who's going to win the title? Who's going to go down? Who's going to be battling for Europe? Who are the players to look out for? Which fantasy players should you have in your team? All of it is going to be answered in the next hour or so on the Eliteserien Season Preview Podcast. So without further ado, let me introduce the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Meatman Soccer. How are you, Steve Wyss?
Mr. Jonathan Fadugba, I am doing well, thank you, my friend. You're sounding very smooth tonight. You're looking very smooth as well, I must say. You obviously did very well in the season preview last week on Allsvenskan. Very well received. Thanks very much for all your kind comments, everyone. And now it's my turn. It's time. It's been a long wait. I've been chomping at the bit. And we are finally ready for liftoff on Monday, Easter Monday, the 10th of April. So bring it on.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And for those who haven't listened to the Swedish Allsvenskan episode, it was last week. You can go back and listen to that, of course. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, iTunes, etc. And for a bit of background, of course, if you're a first-time listener, maybe, Mr. Wyss is our Norwegian in-house expert. He's been covering the Norwegian League for many years. Stevie will tell us a little bit of background. I've been covering Sweden for many years, but just tell us, for those who don't know much about your interest in Norwegian football. You and Norwegian football go back a long way, let's say.
They do go back a long way. It originates where I was looking for summer betting leagues to, place bets on. And, I've tried a lot out down the years, and Norway was always my favorite, my most popular, mostly because there's so many goals scored in Norway. And I guess it came from there, really. I've kept my eye on Scandinavian football in general, but yeah, Norway has been the jewel in my crown as such. So, I mean, how long? It's a long time. Probably you're looking, I remember like posting on forums and stuff, betting forums, talking like 2004, 2005. So, yeah, how long ago is that? We're nearly knocking on 20 years.
Coming up on 2 decades, mate. You're like the Arsene Wenger days.
Yeah, too long. Too long. I mean, that we're kind of showing our age a bit now, but yeah.
Just an insight into the length of time that Steve's been covering this league, of course. And there's been ups and downs. And we've been doing this podcast now 6-7 years. I remember when there were early periods where you were very excited about the league, and then there's been down periods where you were a little bit not so enthused. Then there was a period of time when Glimt came along, that magical team, and so many talented young players coming out of Norwegian football these days. It became a hotbed. Where are you on the sort of Meatman scale ahead of the new season? What's your assessment? If we look back to 2022 as well, what's your overall take based on between last year and looking ahead to this year?
I think excitement level has to be minimum 8 out of 10 on the scale. Minimum. Definitely, maybe higher, because, there is a lot of excitement about Eliteserien football now. There's a lot more interest around as well. With the fantasy, I think, has played a big part in that, especially a lot of fantasy Premier League players have been very interested in the league. The quality has got better. We know there's been a lot of big sales out of the league in the last 2 or 3 years, which I think is a credit to the league. And some great talent has been coming in. And I think Bodø Glimt have breathed some great life into this league. It's almost like a fairy tale, isn't it? How a club can do what they've done. And honestly, the only fans who are a bit upset about it is probably Tromsø fans. But maybe their time will come, Tromsø, in time. Who knows? But I think they can give sort of motivation and inspiration to a lot of different clubs and leagues around the world. But I think, it's in a good place, Norwegian football. I am excited. Going back to 2022, it was once again quite a one-sided title battle. The last 3 of the last 4 years have been one-sided. Molde were brilliant. They actually head into this season having won the last 17 league games. But there's some good football going on, and obviously we've got the start of VAR coming into Norway this year, which I'm not looking forward to, but We just got to get used to life with it now. So, yeah, I'm sure there'll be some teething problems, but overall, excitement level, let's go 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I thought when you started that sentence, we said exciting is minimum. I thought you said exciting is minimal. I was like, good way to get everyone to switch off after a few minutes. But minimum 8 out of 10, and now you've upgraded it to a 9 out of 10. So that is promising to see. Yeah, certainly it was. All the talk's been about Bodø Glimt these last few years, but Molde were the kings of Norway last season by a massive 18-point margin. Just looking at the sort of ins and outs on Transmart, Steve, before we get into, we're going to bring you every single team in the league and give a little bit of an overview. But just before we get started, as we like to do, look at the overall spending in Eliteserien as of sort of now, according to Transfermarkt. Of course, there's been 165 departures from the league, with a total income of 49.5 million euros for clubs. And 16 million euros spent, 15.95 million on 147 arrivals. So the incoming balance, 33.5 million has come into the league basically in terms of money. So the clubs are certainly making a little bit of cash for themselves. And of course, those arrivals, those 147 arrivals, I'm sure, Steve, you're on top of all 147 of them and it can give us insight as we go along. Of course, he mentioned there as well the fantasy element. Steve, you will give us details of the fantasy maybe at the break. But for those who aren't aware, of course, there's a fantasy Eliteserien. We will have a Nordic Football Podcast League as we always do. And on this show, we will bring just a little, just to give a bit of background. We keep extensive databases on all these teams, don't we, Steve? And, we've both got analyst backgrounds. So we have detailed knowledge and we're going to hopefully pass some of that knowledge on to you in terms of maybe players to keep an eye out for your fantasy team as well. Not only scouting, but also just players to watch in your fantasy team. And just to compare it to last season, by the way, the net income for Eliteserien clubs last year in 2022, according to Transmarkt, was 24 million. So more and more money is coming into the league. And transfer expenditure last season was 5 million. So in fact, you could say that that's 3 times more spending, Steve, from clubs this year. So that's really the interesting background. But shall we get into it? I don't know if you have a comment on the spending.
Yeah, I mean, it's my pink book that you can just see here. This is my Eliteserien book. I'm kind of old-fashioned, me. I do keep a lot of databases on spreadsheets and stuff, but you can't beat a bit of pen and paper. And these notes have been going on since probably January, February, mate. So, I'm well prepped, so ready to go into it.
For those who can't see, it's a shiny sort of fluorescent pink A5 notepad. Still got the sticker on it. It looks definitely like it's been jotted in a few times for sure. But yeah, looking forward to this show, and we'll get into it as we always do. We predict the table from top to bottom, and of course we're going to start at the top. I'm not going to give away who you've got to win the league, Steve, but obviously the 2 clear favourites, but bookies' favourites by miles, really, Molde, the current champions, and of course Bodø Glimt, the champions of the season before that. Take your pick. Where would you like to start?
Well, I think we're going to start with the defending champions, Molde. And, I mean, the way I see it, I think it's a 2-horse race for the title. The bookmakers have both clear favourites. Bodø Glimt, slight favourites with most books. Not much in it, really. And honestly, I have really struggled to predict this. The 1-2 has changed several times for me over the last month.
So before you give it away, we'll talk about Molde before you give it away, basically. So yeah, you've chosen Molde to talk about, but
well, yeah, I mean, we talk about the defending champions on each show, don't we?
Yeah, of course.
So I mean, I still might change my mind now live on air.
Is that close? So you think it's that close?
It's that close? Yeah, for me, it's that close, indeed. So yeah, but we'll start with Molde, and then we'll talk about Bodø Glimt, and then after that, we will get into the rest of the teams. But for me, yeah, one of these 2 teams I don't see anyone else winning it, basically.
Yeah, so other teams maybe not involved, but Molde, they, like we just said there, they kind of, ultimately they pretty much walked the league, really, didn't they? Last season they were fantastic. What's your assessment of them sort of going into this season? I mean, you've made your choice. I can see it here. We'll reveal it in a second, but just give an overview of like Molde over the last year or so. What did they do to sort of massively win the league last season? What changed, would you say? And do you see a sort of potential continuation of this maybe new era for Molde. They won the league 18 points. They only lost 2 games last season out of 30, compared to Bodø Glimt's 6 games they've lost. So what changed, and what's your overall view of Molde going into 2023?
Well, what changed last year was it was a formation. For many years, they were 4-2-3-1. They were successful with it. But then Bodø Glimt beat them to 2 titles, including in 2021, which was the one close title race. Glimt won it, I think, with a couple of games left. But for most of the year, it was pretty close. And it looked like Molde were going to win it for a lot of that campaign. So I think that was a wake-up call. They changed their system, I think, primarily to deal with Glimt. And they beat them 3 times, twice in the league and once in the cup final. So it worked. But it actually worked pretty well against most of the other teams as well. They finished the season with 17 consecutive wins. That's incredible. I don't actually know what the record is in Norway, but it must be up there. So, heading into this new campaign, they might be playing for records and everything. And really, if you look at the raw numbers and metrics, and we like that, Molde overachieved defensively a lot. They had 1.41 expected goals per game, which was the second best in the league. Bodø Glimt was 1.23 expected goals against per match. But they only conceded 0.83 in each fixture. Now, that's a massive overachievement, actually. That is nearly half a goal. Well, it's more than half a goal overachievement per game defensively. And now that is really hard to replicate again, I think. And the reasons for that are obviously 3 reasons. The goalkeeper, Karlström, did have a very good season. Probably underrated season, actually. Not enough really we're talking about him. Other teams missing chances against them. And then also, putting bodies on the line. I've seen several high XG positions in data where really good blocks from defenders are actually getting in the way. And that's not a fluke either. That is good defending. So that's where they won the league compared to Bodø Glimt on the numbers. They just didn't concede as many goals. Whether or not they can keep doing that, I'm not sure. Heading into this season, they've always had goals in them. They've lost David Datra Fofana to Chelsea for £12 million, which is a lot of money. And the main replacement is Veton Berisha from Hammarby, former Viking player, of course, as well. There's a few other signings we'll talk about fundamentally. But the big question for me is, these defensive numbers, are they going to overachieve at that end of the field again? If so, by how much? It's asking an awful lot to overachieve by nearly 0.6 goals, isn't it, per game? I mean, that is significant.
Yeah, and it's a good analysis there. I've got 1 or 2 questions for you in terms of transfers. Definitely 1 or 2 names I want to ask you about. But before we do that, let's put you on the spot. Who is your predicted champion this season, or where have you got Molde this season?
Yeah, and I'm not a man that is known for sitting on the fence, but I'm really tempted to sit on the fence here.
and
actually not
give a chance
champion.
You're sitting on the fence. You're not having joint champions. That's no chance. That would end 6 years of you telling me I sit on the fence by sort of bottling the season preview prediction. No chance.
No, I am going.
What does your gut tell you?
I am going to predict. Right. I actually want Bodø Glimt to win the title again. I do. I just like how things have gone with that club. But I think my prediction is Molde to win the league. I think Molde win the league, and I think over the explanation of that will not just include talking about them, but also Glimt in a minute. But look, they despite those overachieving numbers defensively, they finished how many clear? 18 points clear at the top last season. That's a heck of a rise. I mean, Bodø Glimt to close that gap have got to obviously pick up more points themselves, but they've also got to hope Molde drop down a bit. And we look at the squad for Molde, and we talk about this. You talked about this in the Swedish preview with Malmo a bit. The depth is unbelievably huge in every single area of the field. They have got all bases loaded and covered, and they've had injuries in the last couple of years, and they've managed to cope okay with them. And the reason for that is because they've built this squad depth of great mix of experience, youth, quality, pace, flair, and skill. And over the course of 30 games, they're well equipped for it. And it's going to be this 3-5-2 or 3-4-3 system again. Obviously the goalkeeper Karlström's a big player at the back. defensively, they've had players that have done really well last season. In midfield, you got guys like Sivert Mansverk, who I think this might be his last year at the club. And then you got the club captain Magnus Wolf Eikram, who's still one of the most skillful players in there. And when you bring in Berisha, who's going to replace David Datro Fofana, he's probably going to be more effective than Fofana, to be honest, more clinical. So they've answered a lot of questions. And I think really sometimes when you do have such a great season, is the motivation, is the drive there as much? And it can be vice versa for the team chasing them. But I think they'll be confident about getting over the line. And also, I think they're a more settled club. Like, I don't see Erling Moe going anywhere, the manager, for example. I don't really see too many of their players moving on in mid-season yet. I mean, it's always possible. It's more likely to at the end of the season. So, yeah, they're just a monstrous club. And I've said before, I think the work that Erling Moe's done here is a bit underrated, really. They're not the most popular club in Norway for several different reasons, but I've always given them a lot of credit on this show.
Yeah, I remember back end of last season, we had a little episode, didn't we, about Erling Moe, and well, not a whole episode, but just talking about his work. You were very praiseworthy of the work he's done there. And it's a bit of a break from your previous few years, in fact, because this is the first season you've predicted Molde to win the league in the last 3 seasons. Last 2 years, Bodø Glimt. So shows you've maybe had a little swing of opinions here. Let's look at some of these transfers, because, I mean, I'm sure even from a fantasy point of view, people are going to be looking at Veton Berisha, the Hammarby man. I can give a bit of insight into what happened at Hammarby, but you know him much better than us, obviously, from his time in Norway. He's back in Norway. He's not been there long, was he, in Sweden? How big a signing is he? You've just said he could be even actually more effective than Fofana, who got a significant amount of goals last season, didn't he? He still scored about, I think, 15 goals roughly. Maybe more.
He did.
So what does Berisha bring to Molde, signed from Hammarby?
Experience. He knows he's scored a lot of goals at this level before. He knows the teams. He knows the environment. And I think, although he does have some history of injuries, I think he can bring a bit of durability to Molde, because he's not going to start every single game. In fact, from a fantasy perspective, Molde are the hardest team. They're like the Man City of Fantasy Premier League, Jonathan, where, you talk about Pep Roulette, don't you? And this is sort of Erling Moe merry-go-round. I like that. I thought you'd like that one. It's very difficult because there's a lot of rotation around. You've got to probably hang your hat on some of these players. You're probably going to have to go for Brynhildsen or Berisha in your team, one of those two up front. But they're a lot of money, 12 million and 11.5. And then just sticking
to Berisha, is he? I mean, from your point of view, is he a must-have? Would you say 100% get him in your team, or you say, from what you're saying there, the Moe merry-go-round?
He's on the. I think he's going to be on the penalties, and that's a big factor. That might just sway the factor if you're umming and ahhing between, say, I don't know, Brynhildsen, Berisha, Wolf Eikram. Although I wouldn't go near the Wolf because of his minutes can be very limited at times, although he scores a lot heavily. Then that's what I would lean towards Berisha. Yes, and there is a double game week. I think it's week 4 as well, where we've got the likes of Glimt, Vålerenga, Molde playing Rosenborg as well, and Brann. So yeah, you can sort of get your team ready for that double game week where Molde play Stabaek and Aalesund at home. I mean, you couldn't ask for 2 nicer looking fixtures, really. So, but yeah, Berisha's going to be a key man. I don't really know what went wrong at Hammarby. I thought he would be a big success there. So for him to move on so quickly did surprise me. But it's a good signing for them, really. And you lose Datro Fofana, who was very good for them, but I feel like he missed plenty of chances as well, as we've discussed on this podcast. I think Berisha can be a little bit more clinical, but it's a juggernaut of a squad, and whether teams can be better prepared to face this system this year, I don't know. The teams have got to react to this.
Yeah, and obviously Berisha, for those who aren't aware, 28-year-old striker from Norway, played for the Norway national team. 10 games, 1 goal, and of course his Eliteserien record is pretty good. 73 goals in 188 games, 33 assists according to Transfermarkt. 4 goals in 14 games in Allsvenskan. We always have that debate, which is the tougher league. He really didn't adapt and was sold on quite quickly, to be honest. He was signed for 2 million euros from, by Hammarby in the first place. But he never really seemed to get much of a look in the team. So I don't really know what went on. And I think they just took the profit, to be honest. I think the opportunity came and they thought, let's just take the profit and move on. Hammarby are a club that like to sell. But Molde, it looks like maybe it's a shrewd signing there. Fofana, for those who aren't aware, obviously he's gone to Chelsea. You've always been a little bit, let's say you've got a love-hate relationship with him. You've had him in your 10 to watch twice, but despite that, I still see you on Twitter commenting about him. Not maybe the biggest fan of his. He's currently somewhere around the Chelsea development squad. Obviously, the amount of spending that's gone on there. You think it's an upgrade then, in your opinion, on Fofana?
Yeah, I do actually. I think I would definitely, on a one-on-one situation, hang my hat on Berisha scoring the goal over Datro Fofana. Certainly the 2022 version of Datro Fofana. He still has a long time to go in his career. So, they brought him in. They brought in Eric Kitolano from Tromsø for £500,000. I don't think he's even going to start that many games. But just another example of fantastic depth. A player who scored a lot of fantasy points last year for Tromsø. He's not going to get half that this year because he won't get the minutes. An interesting youngster from Geis in Gothenburg there. Harun Ibrahim, £200,000. Defensive midfielder, might be worth keeping an eye on. And Anders Hagelskjær from Aalborg in Denmark. The 700,000 they paid for him. He was at Sarpsborg last season, last 10 games on loan, and he actually impressed me. So another defensive option there. They've still got injuries, long-term injuries to the likes of Martin Björnbach, Sheriff Sinian, Marcus Corsa starting the season injured, I think, and Martin Ellingson. I can't remember the last time we saw Ellingson, and Arik Ulland Anderson's coming back from an ACL. So there's still long-term injuries in the squad, and they always do seem to get a few injuries, Molde, but they cope all right with them. So all things considered, I think they have a very good chance of defending their crown. But I think it's going to be a very, very close season with Bodø Glimt.
Yeah, by the way, Ibrahim, I'm not sure if he'll necessarily get much game time, but he's a good player, by the way. Good young talent. He did really well. He's done really well for Geis and was looked at by a lot of big teams in Sweden as well. So I didn't actually realise he'd gone there. So that's definitely an interesting signing. I know Molde were looking at him alongside AIK Hammarby and others. So final two questions, Steve. Well, the first one I'm going to ask you is just a simple sentence, maybe in terms of fantasy. Yeah. Who would you say is the one player you would have in your team from that squad? Just keep it to like you don't need to go into long detail, but maybe just putting you on the spot a little bit. And then I've got one final question on Molde.
Yeah, I think it would have to be Berisha. I love Brynhilds and I love him as a player, but I would have to probably go Berisha, and I can't fit both in. The goalkeeper is maybe underrated. I'm not a big fan of spending money on fantasy goalkeepers, but they find a way of keeping clean sheets. I did mention, though, those massive overachievement in defensive metrics. So if you're a believer that it goes back to the norm and goes the other way, then maybe you want to avoid Molde defensive assets for their defensive contribution. But the goalkeeper is probably as strong a pick as you can have.
Good stuff. And just final question on them. You talked about Mu there. Your managers have a massive part to play, don't they, in setting the tactics. He talked about the formation change. Will he keep the same formation this season? And why is it that he's maybe not going to get a bigger job? Is it just that he's very settled there? Is he maybe not glamorous enough? I know they've got obviously Champions League to look forward to, qualifiers, but should there be more hype around Mo? And do you think his tactics will stay the same, or do you think he might come up with another surprise?
No, the tactics, I think, will stay the same now. Now, they might change if things suddenly don't work. We know he's had that 4-2-3-1 in his locker down the year. So if things suddenly go pear-shaped, maybe he revert back to that. I think there should be more hype around him. I think he's very still much under the radar. And I think a lot of people, the reason they give that Molde have done well is because they've got, had big budgets. They've got high-class players. Don't underestimate the ability to actually manage a squad like this and the way he's done it. He's not particularly outspoken, in the way. Let's compare him to, say, Kjetil Knudsen. I think obviously it's more a revolutionary system, a bit more modern thinking. I'm not actually sure the age of Erling Moe, to be honest, how much age difference is between the two. But I don't think he's been given as much credit as he should. I just don't see where he would go. Like, he's at, in his eyes, he'll be at the best club in Norway right now. So where on earth could be somewhere that tempts him? Well, I don't think it'd be anywhere in Scandinavia, even if, say, FC Copenhagen came knocking. I don't think. And then, you're looking what other countries would he consider moving to? I think he's very settled at Molde, so I just don't see how he would leave. I don't think there's. Whereas with Knutsen, there's always been rumours every year that he's going to move on.
Yes, and Mu is 52, by the way. This is his 4th year. He joined in April 2019 at Molde, so he's been there for quite a while, whereas Knutsen is 54. So a two-year age difference. And Knutsen joined in January 2018. So just a year as well in terms of how long they've been at their respective clubs. On that note, let's move on to Bodø Glimt. You think it's going to be, flip a coin, wave a candlestick. It's going to be close between the two of them. But you've got Glimt in 2nd place. Now let's just look at them. I mean, they're a team that has just delighted fans across Europe, really, not only in Norway, but some of the work they've done. The Roma game is still probably one of the best games I've seen in the last sort of 4 or 5 years in terms of just all-round magical performances and good football as well. But you've got them in 2nd place. Obviously, there was that 18-point gap last season, so something's not worked out in the last year or so. What is going on at Bodø Glimt? What is your assessment?
Well, I think I'm actually going against the grain here. Probably about 75%, 80% of the predictions I've seen have put Glimt as winning the league. So I may well be wrong with my prediction of them in 2nd place. And they finished with 60 points last year. And if you look back, I think there's definitely loads of optimism how they can improve to perhaps the 70-point mark. Because last year, so much was going on at the club. They obviously were involved at this stage last year in Conference League, which I think derailed their start domestically a bit. And then obviously in the summer, they had that incredibly mammoth run in the Champions League. They were, 5 minutes away from penalty kicks against Zagreb to qualify for the group stage of the Champions League. And I think that derailed them. It's not easy playing in Europe week in, week out, and then getting so close. And then obviously they're involved in the groups as well for the Conference League. So I think you can accredit probably as many as 10 points dropped due to Europe. So that is something. Obviously, we've got to consider that in the summer they're going to be involved again, but it's only going to be Conference League qualifying, which I think obviously can take it a bit out of you, but only maybe the last round. So logically, I think that there is that factor. They're in the Norwegian Cup semi-final, which takes place soon against Lillestrøm. They're the favourites to win that competition now, with Brann and Stabaek the other side of the draw. If they lifted that trophy, it might just give them a real boost. I think last year they lost that final to Molde, and it was a real downer for them, not just because they lost the cup final, but who they lost it to. So that could be another reason why they really gives them a boost. And I think the squad was a bit more unsettled last year as well. I think the squad this year is a little bit better. They have reinforced fairly well. There's still an area or two I'm a little bit concerned about, which is, I'll come to that soon. But yeah, I expect them to get more than 60 points this year. I expect them close to the 70-point mark. And then it's just a question whether Molde won't get 78 points again. They'll drop down. It's just too hard. And I think there could be a very thin layer of paper between both at the end of the year. It wouldn't shock me in the slightest, Jonathan, if it went to a final day title decider, which we're kind of long overdue, aren't we, in Norway for that? I don't think, has it ever happened since we've done the Nordic Football Podcast? I don't think it ever has. Still one of the best climaxes to a season was that one in Sweden where 3 teams could win it. Maybe we can get something similar for Norway this year. But Glimt will go very, very close. I think they're going to be a fine team.
Yeah, well, according to you, it won't be a 3-horse. It won't be, unless we have some massive surprise. It won't go to a 3-day final, but you think maybe a 2-day final is potentially possible, which is really interesting. Talked about spending, Stephen. One of the things that sort of grabs my eye when we just talk about Glimt is that, the money they've spent. Because, I mean, I'm not suggesting that Scandinavian football is becoming a bit of a powerhouse, but there is a bit more financial might, isn't there? And I'm just looking at some of these transfers that they brought in. They've brought Patrick Berg, obviously back for 4 million euros. I know that obviously that was done before, but they've brought in quite a lot of players, haven't they? They spent $1 million on Sorensen, $1 million on Odin Luras Bjørtoft from Odd. There's a lot of money that has been spent by them over the sort of, let's say, last calendar year. Grom back as well from Aarhus. Would you say that the success they've had has actually led to a sort of financial might? And how much has that propelled them? Because a lot of their success has been sort of from the academy, isn't it? The players they develop themselves, but now they've got that might to be able to maybe go and spend. So where do you think they sit on that balance of still like relying on their academy talents, developing players versus being able to now maybe just pick up the real deal finished product maybe and bring players back like Berg?
Certainly, they now have the financial clout to compete with the big boys in Norway. No doubt about it. As these figures suggest, they still have been developing younger players, not necessarily from their own academy, but they still will bring the younger players coming through. Like your Isak Amundsens of this world. The lad that went to Gothenburg, Elias Christopher Hagen, was an example of that. And a few others as well, but there's no doubt about it. They now have that clout. And if we look at the major loss from the squad in the off season, it is Aalesund back into Roma on a free, but he actually was injured for half of last season. So that in itself is something where, 1,074 minutes, that's all he played in the league. So great player, but in terms of from 2022's output, it's not a massive loss. The big change is in defence. I think they've brought back Frederick Andre Bjørkan, who was brilliant for them in 2021 and before, on a free transfer from Hertha Berlin. Adam Sorensen, another left back from Lyngby for $1 million. Bjørtoft is a talent to watch out for, a 24-year-old now from Odd for another £1 million there. And experienced head, Omar El Abdellaoui, a right back from on a free, 49 Norwegian caps. And in the minute he's injured, I don't think he's going to probably play until May, but that is a nice experienced head and a bit of quality to add to the dressing room as well. So big changes in defence. The goalkeeper situation is the one spot I don't like. They were going to be getting Leopold Valstedt from Odd, but that fell through. The player himself decided he didn't want to leave Odd. So that left them in a bit of a hole. They've got Julian Feierlund, who, former Rosenborg talent, of course. I quite like Lund. He's never really going to be, not yet anyway, a number one goalkeeper for a side that wants to be winning the league and also obviously be challenging to qualify for European groups again. So I think Feierlund's a really good number two. They brought back Nikita Kaikin, who left at the end of the season for Bristol City. He left on January the 25th officially. Made the bench, I think, for 8 or 10 games for Bristol City. And now he's back on a free. It just didn't work out there. So obviously Nigel Pearson, maybe he didn't like what he saw from him, or maybe Nigel Pearson was like an ostrich and had his head in the sand. But Kaikin, I've always thought he's a decent keeper for Glimt. But I just feel like Valstedt would have been a massive upgrade. I think he would have given them the extra factor. Really good shot stopper reflexes. So Kaikin, he's staying the same, effectively, same goalkeeper, but that left the club and is rejoined. It's an okay situation, but I think long term they need to be looking at getting a really top class keeper. So it's a shame that Valstedt didn't come.
Yeah, and I know you rate him a lot. We had a Y Scout blog where you've talked about him as well. So keep an eye out for that if you follow us on Twitter at Nordic Footpod, or obviously Y Scout's website. And we're delighted to partner with them again this season to bring us video content and analysis. I've got to ask you about, you're talking about some players there that to look out for. Obviously, Bjørkan coming back is a big boost. The main question always with Glimt is really the manager. We did start this section with Knutsen. Funnily enough, Steve, when we had a little chat about the Chelsea job about a week or so ago, potentially becoming available in Spurs, I gave you a little tip, didn't I? But as I was looking at the Spurs vacant manager's job and the favourites for the next manager job at Spurs, there's a name that came up on the list which caught my eye, and that is the name of Kjetil Knutsen. I think he was about 10th favourite or something like that. But the fact he's even on the list says something, doesn't it, about him? Even just a quick Google search, I can see Norwich, I can see Burnley, I can see Rangers, I can see Bournemouth. I mean, he seems to be linked to more managers than Alan Kirbishley or Rafa Benitez these days. Every single Prem job that comes available, it seems he's the outside tip. Is this the year he takes the leap? Because those who know Norwegian football, it seems to have been on the cards for about 4 years, Steve, really. But it's never happened. He's stayed very loyal to Glimt, hasn't he? What's your assessment of that? Because you did say that was maybe one of the factors in you choosing who wins the title.
Yeah, and we know it was strongly rumoured last year that he turned down 2 championship jobs. He was close to considering going to the championship. There was even rumours he turned down a Premier League job. Supposedly he was the second choice on the Brighton shortlist behind De Zerbi. Now, Brighton are a club that do brilliant recruitment, both in terms of players, staff, recruitment, everything. And, for him to be on that list just shows you how, I think, well he's thought of. They've made a great choice in De Zerbi, but they would have made a good one in Kjetil Knutsen as well. I was really excited when Leeds sacked Jesse Marsh for several reasons, but one of them was, at one point, Kjetil Knutsen was the second or third favourite. And I'm thinking, go on.
He's on that Google search, actually. Yeah, Leeds are there.
I'm like, go on Radrizzani, our Leeds president, get him in. And I was thinking, I would have been very excited to get Kjetil Knutsen in. But yeah, I think at some point he's going to have to make that leap. And the most likely time for it is obviously in the summer. That is a time when managers most likely to take over clubs in mainstream Europe. Got a whole pre-season. And I just got a feeling this particular year, he won't be able to help himself. He's 54 now, like you say. If he's not going to move this year, I think he may never leave Scandinavia. So, yeah, it's now or never with Kjetil Knutsen. And the big problem for Bodø Glimt, if Kjetil Knutsen left, I do think their level would drop. They've got good players, but he'd be almost irreplaceable. If Erling Moe walked away from Molde right now, I would still say they could win the title. Definitely. I don't think an awful lot too much would change unless they brought in a terrible manager. As long as they brought in someone serviceable, they'll challenge. Glimt, Kjetil Knutsen is such a big part of their setup that it would be a massive blow to lose him. So with that doubt in your mind, I feel like he may well go this summer. It's just never that convenient for him to leave at the end of the Norwegian season, is it? Around sort of November time. There is that danger.
I mean, he's a consummate professional. We've had so many episodes talking about Kjetil Knutsen. I feel like one day, I mean, if anyone listens to the show who likes clipping audio content, by the way, get in touch, email us, because we've got so many clips talking about Kjetil Knutsen for the past few years, haven't we, in terms of his achievement, his style of play, what he does with the team, mentality, the philosophy he instills into them. There's so many things you can read about him that we won't go into now, maybe, but, he's such an all-round manager. But I think the interesting thing on that is, that, like you've said, the rumours have to be a little bit distracting. Would you not think? Just being linked to so many jobs
Definitely.
over the years, getting approaches. I mean, I'm not suggesting he's distracted by that, but it can't help Glimt, can it? That every 5 minutes, there's sort of rumours going in. Do you think that noise maybe affected them last year at all? And do you think it could affect them this year, or do you think he's got the ability to just zone that out and it doesn't affect the club?
I think it has.
Also, Steve, the spotlight. Even with Europe, there's been a lot of spotlight in Europe in European football, hasn't there, on Glimt?
Yeah, there has, and I don't think anything was quite the same since the Jose Mourinho incident. To be honest, I think that shook Kjetil Knutsen a bit. I think it was like a reminder. If you want to be a big boy, that's what you're up against. All right, Mourinho is maybe an extreme example because he is, but I think it was a reminder to him. It's a tough world out there at really the high levels. And maybe that's put him off going to some of these places. Maybe that's why he's waiting, if he is waiting, for the right project for him. But in terms of the rest of the squad, there's so much been going on with these distractions in the last couple of years. Maybe they're more used to it now. I guess I'd better talk about why actually this manager is linked with these clubs so often, because they play a great brand of football. It's not just great results, but it's a great watch. Really attack-minded, coordinated pressing, great movements, and obviously development of the players as well in terms of clearly up coaching the players. Obviously, it's not just him, it's his coaching staff as well, a whole team around him. We've got to give all of them credit. But there's so many factors towards Knutsen why he is an appealing player. And they scored the most goals last year in Eliteserien, 86 goals. I think they scored over 100 goals in one of the seasons they won the league. Incredibly high XG, the most of any other team, 2.33. They always overachieve their XG because the likes of Pellegrino's in the team who scores wonder goals. So they've got guys who don't just score tap-ins, but they've got guys who can score from 20, 30 yards out regularly from extreme situations. They had the best expected goals against in the league, 1.23, but they did concede 1.37 per game. And that's an area, I think that's why they're bringing in these extra defenders to maybe make sure they live up to those metrics. If they can just shut out goals. The problem is, though, I mean, already we've seen in the Norwegian Cup, a mad game against Viking. They were 3-1 down and won 5-3. There's too many of those games in last year for me where they just concede goals randomly. And sometimes they do enough to win them, but eventually that bites you. You need to keep clean sheets more regularly, and I think that's what they need. They need to find a way to control the games like they did in 2020 and 2021. If they can do that, there's absolutely every chance they can regain the title.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And I mean, in terms of what you said there about the Mourinho incident, I remember the comments he made. I think it was a direct quote where he said, it kind of put him off football. So, you're not exaggerating there. And some people might listen to that and think you're being a bit far-fetched, but he did actually even say it, made him question his, it became a really ugly tie in the end, didn't it? Mourinho with the tricks that he can get up to at times to get in the head of other managers, maybe. But yeah, so you've got Glimt in second. We'll move on in a second. Just finally, Steve, one name for your fantasy team from Glimt, if you had to pick one.
Or two.
I'll let you have two, let's say.
Two players that you absolutely have to have in your team, and they are expensive, but you got to get them in. Armel Pellegrino and Ugo Vettelson, 100%. 13 million and 11 million, two midfielders who will just score goals, get assists, get bonus points. And if you don't have them in your team, you may well lose a lot of ground on your opponents in fantasy. It's as simple as that. I just want to make one mention to Joel Mvuka, who's an 8.5 million player. Really nice value there, but he will only be with the club until June because he has signed for Lorient. I think it was like £4 million. He's on loan until mid-June, and then he will be going to Brittany and strutting his stuff in Liga from the start of 2023-24 season over there.
Yeah, and great stuff there for your fantasy team. In terms of Glimt, they've only won the league twice in their history, 2020 and 2021, of course. That fairy tale story. Let's see if it continues or not. But in third place, Steve, you've got one of the only teams, just looking here, I think 1, 2, 3, one of only 6 teams in the league that plays on natural grass in Eliteserien. So it's a team that, for the listeners long-time listeners, I know we talk about love-hate relationships. Yeah, I know you.
You are absolutely teasing the listeners here, by the way, because I think they know what you're going to say here.
It's another sort of club that you've had a long love-hate relationship with. They've been up, they've been down. But we did actually cover them a fair amount last season. I know, you were a bit high on them last season. Take it away, Steve, with your tip for third place.
And I have to say, I really hope I'm right about this prediction. In fact, I'd love them to get involved in the title race, actually, because I like how they're being run at the moment. The team I'm predicting for third this year is Lillestrøm. And that might come as a bit of a shock to quite a lot of people. I think they would be in most people's top 5, certainly top 6. But I don't think many would have them as high as third. But they've finished 4th both of the last 2 seasons. That's pretty solid work. And they will once again, they'll be in Europe if they win the Norwegian Cup or if Bodø Glimt win the Norwegian Cup. So that's something for them to look forward to there. But I think this is a team that has the potential to improve this season, mostly because of the signings they brought in, not just now, but sort of from last summer. And they're a developing project where I like the staff that's in place. I like the infrastructure at the club. And you mentioned that natural grass. It's an awkward place to go as well. I think home advantage is really important. I think Rosenborg had the best home record last year, and they're on natural grass. There's so much artificial going around now that often teams don't like traveling here. So, I think Lillestrøm can maybe surprise a few people here and get into the medals. It'd be nice to see them get in the medals, actually. And I'm putting faith in them above 2 or 3 other teams that others may have higher.
Yes, and they're a team that they've got a lot more success historically than Glimt, even 5 titles, aren't they, Steve?
Yeah, they do have a history. They're a club based in the Oslo region. Big rivalry with Vålerenga. That's one of the big fixtures of the season, as always. Just going to briefly say one of the main reasons I like them is I think they've probably got the best strike duo in the league. They've got two fantastic strikers at the moment. Akor Adams, the Nigerian frontman. What is it about Nigeria producing incredible strikers at the moment, by the way, Jonathan? And Thomas Len Olsen. So that duo, Thomas Len Olsen was, I think he was the top scorer in the league 2 or 3 years ago. He went somewhere in the Middle East, got paid, and then he came back, Lillestrøm, in the second half of last season. But the formation they played last year was more 3-4-3. So they always went with one striker. Well, it's obvious what they're doing this year. The manager, Guy Becker, wants to get them both in the team together. So we're looking at 3-5-2. And I think that is an absolute nightmare for defenders to deal with. Adam, they're both physically strong. Adams has pace and skill. And Olsen's just an absolute poacher. They're both guaranteed goals if they stay fit. Whether Adams lasts the whole season with them, I don't know. I think the player himself, basically, he didn't want to leave in the winter. I think there was offers for him. He wanted to stay. Maybe in the summer, if he just goes bonkers, then it just will be irresistible for him or the club to move on. I've got a feeling he may last the season, but a very worst case scenario, they're going to get him till July. So they've got goals in them. No doubt about it. I really like the goal situation. And they're playing this 3-5-2. I think they've got a good defence. They've strengthened defence by adding a big power horse, Ruben Gabrielsen, from Austin FC in MLS, former Lillestrøm before, Molde, Toulouse as well. And he's come over because of personal reasons. But it's a great signing for them. A massive coup. They wouldn't have expected someone like him. But they've also handpicked a couple of good players domestically. Vettel Sharvek was strong for HamKam last year. Probably only going to sit on the bench, but he's a great option. Tonneson from start for 300,000. Nice player, can play left back or left wing back. And, they've got options. I think probably the weak point is in midfield. If I had to pick a hole, I think they could do with a little bit more midfield depth or a bit of quality. That will, if anything lets them down, it will be there. But overall, they are looking strong. And I always love teams, mate, that have got goals in them, as you know.
You do indeed. And Akor Adams, a player you've talked about a lot, even on Y-Scout. I think you've had a blog on him and you've always named him as a player to look out for. One of the reasons that I do enjoy doing this show with you, Stevie, you are, despite your acid tongue at times for teams, that you are a fair man at heart. I remember the years when Lillestrøm got relegated. You definitely had a bit of venom for them. But one thing I can say about you is you do call it as you see it. You're not harsh unnecessarily, which I think is a good trait to have. You know what I mean? So you've come around to them, and now you've been praising them a lot in the last year or so. So to me, I think that's a great characteristic of yours. But let's look at kind of, you mentioned the sort of the key players. I mean, they've lost a couple as well. I'm just going to name a couple of outgoings. Igo Ogbu's gone to Slavia Prague, 2.5 million. I know this is over the last year, of course. Some of them might have left previously, but Kaan Karinen, centre midfielder, to Prague as well, Sparta Prague, 1.5 million euros. So they've made quite a fair bit of money. I mean, Tom Pettersson, for example, we talked about on the Allsvenskan season preview. He's gone to Mjällby, and Colin Rosler as well, both from the same club. Both gone to Mjällby, who are in the Swedish Cup final. I mean, Paul-Andre Helen, he's gone. I know he's a bit old now, but is there anyone they're going to really miss, or do you feel like you've got them third? So I'm guessing you think they've managed the squad well, but is there anyone that you think, we could be a bit of a miss?
Yeah, Ogbu had a very good season last year in defence, and Pettersson actually did reasonably well until I think he had an injury. So that's why they've had to bring in so many defensive reinforcements. But I'm really confident they've not just replaced them, but actually upgraded. Some key players to watch out for. How can I forget the goalkeeper, Mads Christiansen? He's probably maybe the best goalkeeper in the league, in my opinion. Fantastic shot stopper. And he's the last line of defence. Even scored a goal for them last season. So he's one of my favourite keepers in the league. Former 10 to watch, of course, on the list there. Vettel Dragsnes can now move out a bit wider into the left wing back spot, where I think he's going to be more effective rather than left centre back. Paul-Andre Helen's actually still at the club in a coaching role. I think it was a surprise. I think he's coaching the under-19s, but he's also working for TV, and he's signed for like a 4th division club to do some games as well. So he's a man of many traits at the moment, Paul-Andre Helen. He's actually someone I'd love to get on this podcast one day. I don't think he would ever agree, but you never know. Because he's quite a bit of an outspoken figure. Once compared winning Eliteserien titles at Rosenborg to the birth of his children, things like that. I think he'd be a very interesting character, but he's still going to be around the club, which is important. And he's also had a say in some of these players that they brought in. I know he's come out and said, for example, there's a player they brought in, another young Nigerian, Uber Charles midfielder. Helen had a big part in bringing him. He believes he's the next John Obi Mikel. So, I think there's some really good. You got Tony Ordinas is at the club, in the setup, coaching, and also recruiting. Fantastic man we had on the pod once. They've got a good setup in place, and this club is on the up, Jonathan. I think they're just a little bit light to get involved in the title race. So I'd love to see them mix it, and they did mix it for a while last year.
Yeah, Ordinas was on the podcast. If you go back into the archives, we do have an eclectic mix of former guests, and we do actually have a special guest coming for you in the next week or so, which we may well discuss on this show. If not, keep an eye out for it. Subscribe to the YouTube and the podcast. We're closing in on 500 YouTube subscribers, and we'd love to get that soon. So if you aren't on the YouTube yet, then maybe go and click subscribe. But Lillestrøm in third, and I do like your Tony Ordinas. He was a great interview, actually. One player for the fantasy team, Steve.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to go with Thomas Len Olsen, really, because he's going to be on the penalties up front. Adams is a cheaper option by 1 million, but because Olsen is on those penalty kicks, and I think you've got to look at him. And I think one of the Vettel Dragsnes left wing back, I think, could be getting quite a few clean sheets and assists this year.
Sweet, like that. And so Lillestrøm in third, a big call. You had them in fifth last season, which that also surprised a lot because they were just newly promoted, weren't they? I think.
The previous season, I think they were newly promoted. But I've been high on them since they've come in the league, and they've kind of proved me right so far. Yeah,
so let's see if that can keep going. The team that plays in yellow, and in fourth place, arguably the biggest club in the league. Who have you got here? I mean, it's one of two, isn't it, really?
I have gone with Rosenborg in fourth place. And I think if you had said this to me at the back end of last season, I would have been surprised at myself, because Rosenborg back end of last year's season were really on the up. They've got themselves back in the medal spots, and we're thinking next year they challenge for the title with Glimt and Molde. But I don't like how the winter's gone for them, to be honest. I don't. They've sold the big man, Kasper Tengstedt, to Benfica, £7 million. Now, Tengstedt was unbelievable what he did since they signed him from a Danish club, Horsens, midway through last season. His goals and assists combined were nearly 30 combined in something like 15, 16 games. It's outrageous stats. I actually stupidly haven't got them to hand. I have to look into my pink book here. 1,201 minutes, 14 goals, and 15 goals and 9 assists. I mean, it's outrageous, really. I mean, incredible player. They've got good money for him, but that's a massive loss. And I just don't think they've replaced him yet. I still think the squad is actually a little bit thin on the ground. There's always a massive, massive injury problem here at Rosenborg, which they've got to get on top of. They've got to get on top of that. So, and I don't like how they're looking heading into the season in pre-season. Very similar to last year, actually. I think they could be a little bit slow out of the blocks if they're not careful. But I do expect them to improve as the season goes on. They'll probably reinforce in the summer transfer window. They're going to have some money to spend. And I think they'll get into their rhythm as the year goes on. So over the whole course of the season, I think fourth place is a fair assessment. I could see them as high as third. I don't see them getting in the title race, though.
Yeah, and they've never, this is a big club, Steve. It's a bit, I mean, it's from a Swedish perspective, this is almost like sort of having Malmö so low down for so many years. They never seem to be on your radar. I mean, what really is going on with Rosenborg? Because they've won the league 26 times in their history. I mean, but they've not won it since 2018. I mean, pretty much, Steve, the minute we started this podcast, they packed it all in. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it's not related, but they only won the league twice since we've been doing this show, which is really, I think, pretty extraordinary for such a massive club. Where are they actually going wrong? Because I know they've got Conference League. They finished third last season, so it's not all doom and gloom. But I've never seen you come into a season preview with real conviction about them, to be honest. And maybe in the early years, but last 3 or 4 years, it's been pretty bleak. Where are they going wrong in terms of their direction as a club?
Well, you've got to ask yourself the question: why did they win so many titles? And it's because during those periods they had by far the biggest resources, finances, best squad by miles, don't get me wrong, there was also some good coaching, I'm sure, at times, and players that have done well. But what happened is other teams got really good in Norway. Look at the Glimt project. Molde, as soon as they started to sell, say, Haaland, they've really done well with that investment and the money, got themselves into positions. And now there's other teams snapping at their heels as well, like your Lillestrøms. Vålerenga would love that. We'll talk about Brann soon. And Rosenborg, it's a question of you snooze, you lose sometimes. And I just think they took their eye off the ball a bit. Certainly, they made a wrong managerial appointment with Erik Horneland, for example. Things like that can bite you in the long term. I'm still not sure, really, they've got the perfect manager for them. I mean, Kjetil Rekdal's done well. I like plenty of things about Kjetil Rekdal, but I still think they'll be better off with a more modern, forward-thinking coach who is a little bit more on attack-minded. Still think Rekdal, deep down, is a defensive coach, and that can sometimes be to your detriment. Really, let's be honest, they only started to catch a light last year when Tengstek came in. But there are some positives, but if they're not careful, Jonathan, like the Tengstek's brilliant second half of last season, we'll look back on it and think, well, what was the point of it? All it got them was a third place finish and nothing else. So if they don't invest that money, it's almost sad, isn't it, that a player is only at a club for 6 months, and then he goes because he's so good, and it's like you just don't get your money's worth out. I mean, I remember say for Leeds with Rafinha, we had 2 really good seasons out of him, and it's fine. He goes after that 6 months a player. Imagine Man United. I mean, probably not the best example for you actually, but say you got an unbelievable player, the next Messi, but you only had him for 6 months, then he goes. You feel a bit shortchanged if you didn't actually win something in that period, wouldn't you? But they haven't. All they've got is a third place finish. So his legacy will be if they, they've got to use the 7 million money and really get this squad going, not just for this season, but the next 2 or 3. But there is positives as well. I do like the direction they're going. I've said before, there's too much experience and aging players in the squad, but they brought in a lot of younger talents this particular off season. A couple of Icelandic players have caught my eye. Obviously, last season, Crystal Mari Ingersson came in, wonder kid of Iceland, got injured for a bit, but he's looking good in pre-season. They've brought in Isaac Schneer Thorvaldsen, former Norwich City youth, I think, from Breiðablik in Iceland, scored a lot of goals in that league last year. He looks different. Oscar Aga from Elfsborg, I think, is another 22-year-old. He's got significant potential. They've brought in Agon Sadiku from Honka in Finland. 15 goals in 25 appearances last season. All these guys are under 23 years old. And then you've got another Finn they brought in from HJK, Santeri Varnanen in defence. So they are maybe starting to learn their lessons in the recruitment model now, rather than going for these older statesmen, I think. But again, this can take time. And I think we can't expect miracles out of him in this first season.
Yeah, and going back to your point there, in terms of Tankstead, he was ridiculous, wasn't he? He's probably one of the best since Haaland, maybe, to come out of this region in terms of just his impact, wasn't it? I mean, 7 million Benfica, that just shows you the level of talent he had. He was so good. But you're right, I can understand what you mean, especially when it's almost like, I feel like it's almost an admission of their status, if you know what I mean. Like losing a player that good so quickly is almost, that normally happens to sort of like the small clubs, doesn't it, really? And
yeah.
I think it's a bit of a worrying thing for Rosenborg in terms of, I mean, you can't turn that money down, but it's almost a bit of a sign, like, are they on the downward spiral slightly? But we shall see. I mean, their sporting director, Mikael Dawson, I remember him on Championship Manager for those who are of a certain age. Good utility player. He's their sporting director. Obviously, they signed a lot of players from Sweden, haven't they? And they've lost a few, like Vecchia has gone to Malmo. But all in all, you think that they're in for a sort of fourth place season. Do you think they can make, just briefly, we're running out of time in terms of the top 6, but do you think they can make any real impact on Europe at all? Do you think they can sort of do anything this season do you think they'll even be close to challenging? Is there a top player for them to cling on to? Give Rosenborg fans some hope.
Good. The hope is if they can start the first half of the season competitive, then I expect them to get better as the year goes on. I think by the time the qualifiers come, in the summer. They'll have a good chance of making a group stage, perhaps, if they're in more of their rhythm. They're going to be another team in like a 3-5-2 formation or 3-4-3, similar to Lillestrøm as well and Molde. And they've got some, they do have some decent players as well that are a bit older, like Marcus Henriksen. I like him, defender or defensive midfielder. And yeah, I've got to talk about this injury thing before we move on, though, Jonathan, because this is a theme now. They've already got 3 or 4 players out until mid-May, including Ole Christian Saiter, who linked up so well with Tenkstedt last season up front. This is a continual theme now, and too many players of so many different ages keep going down. For me, that's got to be something to do with their training facilities or the physio staff. Do you remember that time when Newcastle United just kept getting injuries all the time? And it ended up being revealed it was something to do with their surface of their training ground. Something's going wrong here. It happens at certain clubs where this injuries pile up. They have got to get on top of this because it will cost them continually else. So that's a big concern. Overall, I see them 4th. I think they could be as high as 3rd. No higher than that, though. And, if things really go wrong and teams like Brann and Vålerenga do well, they could be down as low as 6th. So let's just see with Rosenborg. But I think there's going to be good and bad things. They'll start a bit slow, though. I think that's the problem.
Yeah. So it's, up and down, but it looks like you think they will gradually improve, but not enough to challenge the big boys. One name for your fantasy team before we move on.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Crystal Marnie Ingasson. I think I like him. I think he's only 7.5 million up front, and he looks sharp in pre-season.
Good stuff. What position do you have interest?
Forward. Attacker.
Lots of forwards to select from. Before we take a short break, we've got the final team to wrap up the top 5, and then we'll have a little break and come back for 6th and below. There's some big clubs still not been mentioned yet, Steve. So before we take that break, who is that final team rounding off your top 5 in Eliteserien this season? Take it away.
Yeah, I think this is going to surprise a few people because I'm going to go with Vålerenga in 5th place. Now, there's not going to be many predictions that have Vålerenga as high as this. There's not going to be many predicting Vålerenga as higher than Brann, for example. But I look at them, and they are a tough team to predict. There were good and bad things about them last year. But I look at their squad on paper. I look at the manager they've got. It's an experienced manager in Dag Ole Fagemo. They've got enough. They've definitely got enough about them that they should be comfortably in the top 6. They really should. Maybe the squad's a little bit underrated, actually, in terms of its ability across the field, but they're always going to have quite a solid defence under Fagemo. They've got a midfield which has got a couple of really exciting players, and the attack will depend on whether a couple of new signings can come off. But overall, I think their balance is not too bad. There's a lot of experience. No one's really talking about them, which is probably a good thing. So I think they can actually be a pleasant surprise and come up to 5th, Jonathan.
The big departure from them is, of course, a player we talked about a lot, haven't we, in this podcast in the past, Osam Sarawi. He's gone to Heerenveen for 1.7 million euros, 21-year-old. He's a talented wide player, isn't he, forward? Do you think he'll be missed? And who are the players that could maybe come in? Who are you looking to this season to make a real impact for them? Because last season, they were okay, but who are you looking to make a big impact?
I am looking for Mohamed Ofkir to make a big impact. Coming from Sandefjord for £500,000, and he had a fantastic year at Sandefjord previously. I mean, to achieve the metrics and the stats of goals and assists that he did at that club, such a struggling team, fair play to him. And now he's moving into a far better squad overall. Sarri was a very unique player and sometimes just completely ran the show. But I think at times I'm not saying he went missing, but he probably didn't have the impact that maybe Vålerenga would have wanted. I know fantasy owners of Sarri were often frustrated down the years that he didn't get the output he wanted. So in terms of actual raw goals and assists, he probably can be replaced. It's just his overall influence on the game was quite significant. But I think Ofkir can do well. They've got an interesting player on loan from Palmeiras in Brazil, under 20. Vitinho, not seen much of him. Maybe he could be useful. Daniel Harkins comes from Year for 400,000. Former SJK player in Finland. 2 very quick transfers for him in succession. Interesting inverted winger. I feel he might kick on this year, actually, quite well. And they've got exciting talents like Jacob Dicko-Eng, 18-year-old attacker, I think could break through this year. Odin Thiago Holm, we've talked about him before. Now he's fully fit heading into this year, 20-year-old, really top midfield talent. And then you've got a defence which is experienced as well. And they've reinforced there as well on loan from Brøndby, former Viking defender Henrik Hegheim, who is highly rated. So I think across the board, they're looking all right, really. I think there is a bit of a doubt. Again, they're another team I would like to see them maybe with a forward-thinking, more modern manager. But for Germo, you can't argue about him. Last season, I said he should have been sacked halfway through. Eventually turned it around really well, and they finished 6th. Did have a poor finish to the season. But I think Vålerenga, the feeling doesn't seem to be great around them. No one's really talking too much, expecting that much of Vålerenga. But they've... I just look on paper sometimes. You ever just think about a team and your initial gut feeling is, they're not going to be that good. Then you actually look at the quality available to them and you're thinking, well, they're good. By default, they've got to be in the top 6. So that's the way I see it. And I like their depth. We're going to talk about Brann soon again, but I really think they've got the extra depth and better younger players coming through than Brann overall. That's why I'm going to predicting them to finish up at Brann.
Yeah, 5-time Eliteserien winners, but they've not won the league since 2005, which is for a big club like Vålerenga. That's pretty massive actually. They're a big club. They're based in Oslo, and by the way, if anyone from Vålerenga is listening, we still are owed 2 tickets from your Twitter account, which I have not forgot, by the way, and I will be claiming them this season. So, ticket office at Vålerenga, you've definitely got an email from the Nordic Football Podcast coming. I can't remember why that came about, but basically they offered us 2 tickets and we said yes, but we never. They offered us tickets for like that weekend, wasn't it? And we couldn't get out of Norway on a day's notice or whatever. But I think we're still going to claim them. So that will round off your top 5. So I'll just read it back before we take a short break. 5th place you got Vålerenga. 4th place you got Rosenborg. 3rd place Lillestrøm. What do you think about that, listeners? Give us a message with Nordic Football on Twitter or on the YouTube comments. Let us know. 2nd place, Bodø Glimt. You think it'll be very close, but you've got champions Molde. So that rounds it off. Coming up in part 2, we've got another bunch of teams to cover. We've got mid-table and also who's going to be challenging at the bottom of the league, who might be going down this year. And there's 1 or 2 predictions that Meat Man Soccer has. I've seen the table here and it's you don't want to miss part 2. So take a little break, get yourself a cup of tea or something, and come back for part 2 shortly. Welcome to part 2 of the Nordic Football Podcast, Eliteserien Season Preview 2023. Meat Man Soccer has had a glass of water. He's ready to go for this second part of the show. Before we get back into 6th place, of course, drumroll, who's going to get that? But we're going to talk about fantasy a little bit, Steve. You're going to give us the code for the league this year. So anyone who's been listening and is jotting down notes in terms of who to have for their fantasy team, now is the time to join the league, the Nordic Football Podcast League, the prestigious league. Steve, give us the details of this.
Yeah, do join Eliteserien Fantasy. There's an English website version for those who want that. It's become a really, really popular, probably the most popular of all the fantasy summer leagues. Same system as Fantasy Premier League. And do join the league. This is a code to join. I'm sure this will be on a tweet as well somewhere. But lowercase, this is the code to join the Nordic Football League. GB1QPS. So do join that league. Everyone's welcome. And yeah, this is a fantasy. I've been poor. The last 2 years, I've been really poor in Eliteserien fantasy. I've got to improve that. My eyes have perhaps been elsewhere in different fantasy departments. I've obviously, Allsvenskan, I've proven myself. I'm involved in a real brutal battle with Fantasy Premier League at the minute with someone. So yeah, my eye again might be a bit away from Eliteserien fantasy, but I need
proving yourself. I don't know, but I'm not sure about that. You've had a good year or so. No, but yeah, Eliteserien fantasy. I mean, we get hundreds of people joining that league, haven't we? We had well over 100. So get involved. Who's going to take the league this year? It's always really competitive, the Eliteserien League. And like you say, the benefit of these leagues is summer league. So when the Premier League ends in about a month's time, you can keep going through the summer. So that is the league. Have you got the code? Do you want to just repeat it one more time? Or?
Yeah, the code again is GB1QPS.
So get involved, get your team in. You've got to obviously the first round of games, which is starts Monday, isn't it, Steve? And 6th place in the league. I mean, I was just looking at a stat here that really astounded me, to be honest, especially for those who maybe follow the Premier League, which is the complete polar opposite. Not a single manager I'm looking at was sacked mid-season in the Eliteserien. I'm right in saying that, Steve. Last season,
you are absolutely correct. Not a single manager lost their job last year. Even the 2 teams that got relegated, Christiansen and Yerf, kept their managers. I have to be honest, I think there was only twice that I personally would have sacked a manager if I was in charge of the clubs. One of them was for Gurmo. It just didn't look like he could last any longer there. But fair play to him, he absolutely turned it around. So he proved me wrong. And I personally would have got rid of Stefan Bilborn as well at Sarpsborg after they lost 8 games in a row. But again, another manager proved me wrong because they finished 10 unbeaten. So it just shows maybe a bit of patience can go a long way in football. I'd be amazed if everyone kept their jobs this year. But fair play.
Fair play indeed. And now it's time for 6th place, Steve. And it's a welcome return for a certain very popular team in Norway. Who have you got there?
Yeah, and this might be lower than quite a lot of people are expecting, but I am going with Brann in 6th place. Relegated in 2021. Disappointing relegation, a shock relegation, I suppose you could say. But they bounced back, first time of asking. They were nearly the Invincibles last year in Obos, but a record-breaking campaign for them in 2022. They won an unbelievable 26 out of 30 games in the Obos Ligaen. 1 defeat, which came with 4 games to go. That was against Mjøndalen, who have always typically been the bête noire of Brann down the years. They don't need to worry about them now because Mjøndalen is still in Obos. But 81 points, 95 goals scored, 16 conceded. Outrageous statistics for Brann. And, I've seen people predicting them as high as 3rd. I've seen even some suggest that they might get involved in the title race, such as their momentum and everything. But let's not forget they are still a newly promoted team only. Not a lot has changed within the squad, which might be a good thing. And I still think predicting them in the top 6 in 6th place here would be a very good season for Brann. So I don't actually think, I was maybe tempted to put them a couple of notches up, but I do have a couple of doubts about them, which I will go on about. But it is good to see them back in the league. They are one of the biggest clubs in the country. And obviously, it's actually nice to see a good feeling around Brann as well, because it's a horrible place when the negativity's there. But now there's a bit more expectation and belief and a good feeling, then hopefully the decent football can flow in Bergen.
Yeah, just talk about their following, because they are well supported. I think you described them as the Liverpool of Norway once, didn't you? I think that was what you called them, which, in terms of fan base, you were basically saying that they're very well supported, and we have had a lot of questions about them. Just talk about their sort of fall and rise and fall over the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, because that season when they went down was catastrophic, wasn't it, really? And then last season, it seems like they turned everything around and absolutely destroyed the league. Yeah. What's actually happened for those who maybe might not be aware of Brann, and where are we at the moment? Temperature check.
Well, Brann are a team that won the league in 2007. They're one of the few teams this century to have won an Eliteserien crown. So, you got to give them credit for that. And the mad thing is, this has happened before. They had a shock relegation in 2014. No one ever saw this coming. I think they lost in the playoff to Mjøndalen. The start of their sort of rivalry with them came back at the first time of asking. I don't think anyone expected that would ever happen again. They're just too good to go down, too big to go down. You do see clubs go down often because like bad finances and things like that. It's not a case of that. I just think it was a general malaise that came in. Lars Arne Nielsen got them, I think, to 2nd and 3rd place in the league 2016, 2018, and then they just sort of slumped to mid-table. And then last year, it just didn't work out for them. 2021, 14th place. They got relegated via the playoff. Eirik Horneland came in and did a fairly decent job in the last sort of 10 games, but the damage was done. So a shock relegation, but I don't think anyone ever doubted they would come back. It's almost a wasted year, but maybe it's not a wasted year if they can sort of build on this incredible 81 points that they've got. I always said last season that the squad that they had in Obos would be mid-table in Eliteserien. So that is actually going to be, let's just see how true that is, because they've not really, of all the teams, they've not added many and they've not lost many. So it's near enough the same squad as it was in Obos. So that can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing, Jonathan. But we'll soon find out just exactly how good this Brann team is going to be.
Yeah, and they're from Bergen, which is the second largest city in Norway. So that obviously, has a bit of a background in terms of perhaps their fan base. I mean, last season, you're looking at the league table here, Steve. It's almost a perfect game. It's almost a perfect bowling alley, isn't it? 30 games, 26 wins, 3 draws, 1 defeat, 95 goals scored, 16 conceded. I mean, the seasons go, you don't really get much better than that. The only team to beat them, I think, was Mjøndalen, am I right in saying?
Mm-hmm. Exactly that, yeah.
And I think that was when the title was pretty much wrapped. So, you're thinking they're going to literally just climb high. They're not even going to need time to adapt. Well, what gives you that confidence, and who are going to be the key men behind that sort of season? Is it continuity, or is it they've dipped into the market and signed some valuable players?
They have signed a couple of good players, I'll say that, smart players. But yeah, like I said, I think this squad last season was mid-table ability in Eliteserien. They've got unbelievable momentum. Like in pre-season, they're tearing apart teams in friendlies. I know they're only friendlies, but they've had 2 Norwegian Cup wins already. 3-0 against Sandefjord, 3-1 against Haugesund. They could have scored more goals in those. They're in the semi-final against Stabaek. They could win the Norwegian. They're two wins away from winning the Norwegian Cup. So, and getting into Europe. So, I mean, they're just absolutely flying at the moment. And don't underestimate that. We see that with teams getting promoted, don't we, sometimes, Jonathan? Let's talk about some key players that they're going to have. Bård Finner, everyone's talking about him. Everyone's getting him in the fantasy team. He scored 16 goals last year. He only actually made 13 starts. He came off the bench a lot and scored goals. Hegebo, a younger player, is another option up front, but I think he's just going to be the first bench option. Mathias Rasmussen, Horneland's converted him from a left winger into an attacking midfielder, scored 15 goals and 8 assists. Let's see how he goes at the top level in that position. Defensively, I'm a little bit concerned, perhaps, actually. Ruben Christiansen's now been converted to a centre-back. I mean, he's 35 years old. The last time he was in Eliteserien, he got ripped apart. He generally did, but that was at left-back. So maybe things are going to be better for him at centre-back. They're going to play in a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 system. I do like the signing of Jafet Seri Larsen from Bodø Glimt. They brought him back to the club for £400,000. I think he's a quality centre-back who would go well for them. And Tore Pedersen is a useful, versatile player brought in from Haugesund on a free. But not too much else has been added. Ulrik Mattisson from Lillestrøm. That's pretty much it, really. Obviously, they've got the enigma of Nicolas Castro, who we've talked about on this show before. He was used to be sort of like the Mitrovic of Norway, too good for the championship, but not good enough for the Premier League. Is this the year that he does a Mitrovic and sort of announces himself, yeah, I'm good enough at Eliteserien level? 27 years old now. So I think they're going to be comfortably mid-table. The question is how high. I just look at it and I'm like, the depth, there's not much depth in this Brann squad, by the way. That concerns me. If they get some injuries, and they didn't get any major injuries last year, that is a big problem for them. So I think over the course of the season, I think they could not fizzle out, but I think eventually top-level football does catch up with you a bit. So they are, for me, going to have to reinforce in the summer transfer window to keep up their momentum.
Yeah, they might hit a wall, is what you're sort of saying. Final question before we move on with Brann. They've got a great fan base. You said the squad is on a high, got good momentum. Let's look at the manager. Where would you rank the manager in Eliteserien if you were ranking all the managers?
Good question. Got me. The thing with Horneland, I think he's not too bad, actually. It was just the wrong fit for him at Rosenborg. Didn't suit him there. There's a reason he got that job in the first place, though, because he overachieved with Haugesund so well. So there's every reason now he can do well with Brann. I think he's quite good sort of man management. by the sounds of it. I think he's always had good relationships with his players in general. So I would rank him. We'll have to do a list one day, won't we, where we rank our managers 1 to 16. I couldn't really definitively do it now, but if off the top of my head, I've him in sort of mid-table in that sort of respect. But just before we move on from Brann, obviously they're very popular with the fantasy at the moment with some of their players. They've got a nice start fixture-wise as well. You've got to be looking at Bordefinner. I know a lot are looking at Rasmussen. And, I guess defensively, you might consider Seri Larsson at 4.5 million, which just seemed quite a cheap price for a team that's promoted that might keep clean sheets. So, Bordefinner's obviously 8.5 million strike. I think a lot of people are thinking about captaining him first game. They've got a nice fixture against Haugesund. Yeah,
and you basically answered this question already, to be honest, but thanks a lot to @ScoobyMan, who was very loyal to the pod last season as well. He said, do you think Brann can be in the top 3? You've answered that, of course, with your prediction here, but hopefully that answers your questions @ScoobyMan. We had a lot of questions in, by the way, so really good work from you, Steve, on the Twitter there. At 12th Yank, Joe Gould, another friend of the podcast, he said, how much of a promotion bounce will Brann have? They won the second division by miles and have one of the best young players in Hegebo, and Seri Larsson, who you've just talked about, recently tied with FC Copenhagen in a friendly top 6 ? So you've answered that there. So thanks a lot there to Joe. Generally speaking, you can even see from just the Twitter that obviously Brann are quite a popular side. But
I just think, just before we move on, I just feel now we're almost in overhyped territory, where I've seen a lot of people thinking, they can get in the medals. They might even title challenge. I think that's just too far-fetched. It's too much to expect of this current squad. Now, if they did reinforce in the summer, fair play. But I think now we're at a position where, it's maybe going a bit beyond what is capable of this squad. Let's not forget they just come from Obos. And, moving up to top division football is difficult. But I do expect them to come out the traps very quickly. I'm expecting a good season. And they are one of the clubs, actually, they almost need a little bit of hype because it gets the fan base really ticking. You know what I mean? So it's good in a way, but don't want to get too above themselves.
A fan base that needs hyping. Okay, I see the comparisons there in a certain way. But let's move on. So, team who finished 8th last season is the team that you have next in your list. So 7th place this season, Steve. Take it away.
Going with Sarpsborg in 7th, and if you're after a team to support and as a neutral, you listen to this show for the first time. Who might I like in Eliteserien, a club that maybe isn't expected to challenge? I think Sarpsborg at the moment are one of the most exciting teams. They used to be the most boring team. I used to dread talking about them on this show. Genuinely hated it. But the manager that's coming, Stefan Billborn, I did say I would have sacked him last year. But it's not because I don't rate him. I really like him. I just think his system is so... The amount of goals that are going to be involved in Sarpsborg game is going to be really high, both ends of the field. They play one way. It's fairly gung-ho. It's end-to-end, high press, high energy, take a lot of risks as well. So great team to watch, Sarpsborg this year. And they've got a couple of exciting players. They've got injuries as well. Difficult team to predict in terms of league position. But really, I don't think they're going to be below the top 10. I think things are going badly wrong if they're below the top 10. We saw last year when this system works well, it's really difficult to contain. So, they're a bit of an enigma club, actually, Sarpsborg, but they've still got a decent squad. They've got players who might step up, and they've signed 2 or 3 who interest me. So overall, I'm thinking 7th place for them, Jonathan, and a very, very good side to watch as a neutral.
Yes, Billborn, former Hammarby man. I remember games when he was in charge of Hammarby ending sort of 7-3, I think 7-4. He's all out attack. Definitely, like you said there, expect goals maybe. I know we have a nice little betting community. Last season, the Patreon, Steve, that we had weekly predictions on really good success rate, didn't we? It was a successful season for anyone who joined our Patreon in terms of getting predictions right, and we will be looking to sort of have a variety of different content on Patreon again. So patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast. But Sarpsborg, a team that do tend to definitely be high on the goals count. I mean, they have recruited from Sweden in the likes of Simon Tibbling. He's come from Randers, hasn't he? And I know that obviously Jeppe Andersen's gone there as well. Who would you say, like, if there was one, I know that we talk about signings, but if there was one player that you think is central to what they do, could be central to the defense, could be central to the midfield, could be a main striker, could even be a goalkeeper, like, who would you sort of pinpoint, put your hat on? Because I remember at Hammarby, sort of Tankovic was the one that Billborn kind of just creative-wise just put, he hung his hat on Tankovic, Muammar Tankovic. Is there like a similar player like that for Sarpsborg, who's sort of that creative fulcrum that, links everything together in the attack? Or who would you say is the one key man at Sarpsborg that you want to keep an eye on? Or is it just a variety of talent?
I don't think there is one. And I think that's a strength of the squad. If you took one player out now, then I don't think they're going to be too badly affected. But they might be looking for someone to pull those strings. I think it's got to come from midfield. I quite like the duo signing, Jeppe Andersen from Hammarby. I mean, he was a regular starter for them last season in a good team. I think that's a good signing. Ramon Pascal Lundqvist from Groningen, £150,000 signing midfielder. Several Eredivisie appearances in his career. That's a good level of football compared to Eliteserien. I think those two signings are good. I like Tibbling. I think he can step up this year. I always like Mikael Mygard. I think he's an excellent player. Unfortunately, Serge Junior Martinson and Guali has broken his leg, so he's out several months. It's a shame for them. Victor Torp's one to watch out. Can play anywhere in midfield or attack. So they've got options, but they've lost players as well. Salatros went to Stade de Caen. Tobias Heinz went back to Häcken after a loan. I think he's moved somewhere else now. I forget where. He had a great season for them last year. So they're going to have to replace him. Hagelskar went back on loan. He's now at Molde. So, and they're another team, unfortunately, that have injuries. Just one of those, a bit like Rosenborg, actually. They've got some really long-term problems here. Magnar Odegaard, torn pectoral muscle 3 to 4 months out. Mygard himself has had injury issues. A new signing from Kongsvinger, Martin Hole Andersen, who there was a lot of optimism about him. He's now injured for the entire spring, supposedly. I think it's some sort of foot or ankle problem. But he would have been interesting to watch because he had some good goal-scoring numbers in the Obos at Kongsvinger. So, it's a shame, but they've got a big squad. A really interesting Ghanaian, Christopher Bonsu Bar's going to be on the wings. I think he could be one to keep an eye on. And, it's going to be exciting football. They've got goals in them. So, good team.
Good team is the verdict, and 7th place is the prediction from Meatman Soccer for Sarpsborg. And as he's called it, if you don't have a team to support this season, maybe you might want to consider them. So do tweet us at Nordic Football if you are new and sort of considering supporting a team. Let us know who you might be picking. Will you go with Meatman's selection there, or anyone else caught your eye? In 8th place, Steve, you've gone for, I'm just going to name it if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
You've gone for Viking. And what caught my eye in this prediction is that last season you had them predicted the 4th, and now you've got them 8th mid-table. So it's a bit of a downgrade, Steve. What is the rationale behind having Viking where you've got them compared to last season?
I think that maybe the hardest team to predict because, I don't know which version of them we're going to get because the last 2 seasons, they, of course, have been under a dual managerial control. And the names of those managers are Beate Lunde Arsheim and Morten Jensen. Had a very good 2021, but 22 wasn't so good. And really, if it wasn't for a good run in Europe where they very nearly qualified for the Conference League, then I think they would be in trouble because league-wise, I mean, you look at the results they had back end of last season, Jonathan, it's horrendous. I'm not sure the exact stats, but I think it's like 1 or 2 wins in 15 games, which is simply not good enough. It's relegation form, basically. So I think they've done well to keep their jobs. I think it wouldn't have been a bad time for the club to move on from this dual managerial thing and get one man in on a permanent. So that said, they will argue, they've had one good season, so they do have credit in the bank. I think this is now the acid test because on paper, I think there's enough weapons here for this team to challenge in the top 6, actually, if they're managed correctly and if they stay injury-free. They're another team that tend to pick up quite a few injuries. But it's a little bit haphazard as well. The squad seems a little bit of a mess at times. I don't think off the field they run as well as they can. They absolutely didn't get recruitment right in or out last year. Left themselves far too short-handed. Things are a little bit better now, but difficult to predict Viking. I think they're going to be a bit wild as well at both ends of the field. They could be top 6, but they could equally, if they got sucked into a shock relegation battle, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, 11th last season, 9 wins out of 30, obviously 8 draws, 13 defeats, goals 48, conceded 54. So the sort of a middling really season, really, wasn't it? I mean, they were well clear of relegation in the end, 11 points clear, but not the season maybe that some thought they might have. Just on them, before we move on, if you were to name sort of one fantasy player to consider, maybe a cheap option, is there any names that stick out for you from a fantasy point of view for Viking? Because they're quite a big club.
I don't like them, the players in fantasy. I think they're overpriced a bit. I mean, Salverson is coming from Bodø Glimt. He's priced at 9 million. I think that's because he was in the game at Glimt when it first came out. So I think if he started at Viking, he'd probably be maybe 7.5 or 8 million. I mean, that in itself is an interesting situation because they brought in Nick D'Agostino from one of the A-League clubs in Australia. He was meant to be the main striker, but too much clamour from the fans, from the media, saying they've not got enough up front option-wise. So they brought in Salverson, and already D'Agostino's like, I'm going to fight for my place in the team. I'm going to be the number 1 striker. But Salverson has looked much better since he's come in. But they're playing 4-3-3, so only one of these players can start. So there might be a little. That's an interesting little battle to watch out for. They paid 700,000 for Nick D'Agostino, so they can't just let him rot on the bench, can they? Can they maybe get a system where they get both these strikers in? They've got a few Aussies actually. Patrick Yazbek's coming from Sydney FC, 500,000. Gianni Stensnes is another Aussie who I rate him actually, really good defender, but another injury problem where he does go down, missed half of last season. A lot of players who come in and out of the team. There is some young talent to keep an eye on as well. Possibly Edwin Ospo could have a breakout year. Maybe Tangen can come good. But yeah, a tough side, mate, to predict this one with Viking. It could end anything. It would not surprise me if at some point this managerial duo got the sack.
There you go. The team from Stavanger, which is the 4th biggest city in Norway, and according to Wikipedia, Steve, it has the warmest climate, apparently.
Well, yeah, it's in the southwest of the country. Yeah,
in Norway. So maybe that explains the sort of the attraction potentially for people from some of the Australian players there. It's maybe not as cold as the rest of Norway. To a certain extent, but who knows? Also, it was named the European Capital of Culture in 2008 alongside Liverpool. So there you go, a few facts about Stavanger there. But yeah, Viking, you have got down in 8th place. Let's move north. We're moving down the table, but up north for your next prediction in 9th place, Steve.
Yeah, I'm going with Tromsø in 9th place, and this is maybe a little bit higher than the general consensus out there. I think I've seen most predict them sort of 11th, 12th region. And I might be a little bit high on them, but do you know what? I was too low on them last year. Did I predict them something like 14th or 13th last year? And I got them wrong. Certainly second half of the season, they did really well. And
you had them 14th in the relegation playoff.
Yeah, it was too low. I was poor on my behalf. I underestimated them. And I tell you what I underestimated the most was the really good coaching here from Gaute Helstrup, who I thought they were going to get second season syndrome last year, and it didn't happen. And I think a lot of it is because of him. I really like how he sets up the system in a 3-4-2-1 or 3-5-2 occasionally. I mean, in terms of the numbers, they had the 3rd best expected goals against in the entire Eliteserien. Their XGA of 1.42 is only slightly worse than Molde at 1.41. So in metrics, they're as good as the champions defensively, which is incredible. And the previous season as well, I think they had the 2nd best XGA. So this system that he has in place in terms of metrics should be probably performing better than it has been. They do have a tendency to concede goals, though, and I think it's because they do give up like 1 or 2 big chances in a game. And it's the way the system can just suddenly break down and fold and give away these big chances, but not many of them. So I like that. They're obviously based in the Arctic Circle, the most northerly professional football team in the world, Tromsø. And I think they're also driven by motivation. Bodø, Glimt, obviously, they're bitter rivals up there, done so well. I don't think Tromsø want to be. They want a piece of the action as well. They really, really fired up and motivated. So they're a club to watch out for. I think there'll be more low-scoring games with Tromsø. I think we can expect that. But overall, I think they can have a solid enough campaign. And I remember your prediction in Allsvenskan, Värnamo. Don't underestimate the power of good coaching, and Tromsø applies.
Yeah, where would you rate? We talked about managers earlier. Where would you actually rate this management team in terms of Eliteserien? Gaute Helstrup. He's been there, since 2020 now. He played for the club as well. Where would you rate him? Because there's one or two sort of outside of Kjetil Knutsen. Are there any young upcoming managers maybe that you think could be the next Knutsen? And is this potentially one of them?
Yeah, I think he's got to be in the top 5 managers. I think he's done really well since he's come in here. Took them up, and then kept them up, and then avoided that second season syndrome. And often at Tromsø, you're doing it with limited resources. They're still lacking. They're still searching for a really top class number 9. They just never had one since we've been doing this Nordic football podcast, and that is definitely the issue. Probably just hanging your hat on a striker, but they have brought in 5 new players in that part of the field. So maybe one of them can become a hit. Maybe Hilmar Raffen Mikkelsen, an Icelandic guy on loan from Venezia. Jacob Napoleon Romses, great name, isn't it? From Skeid. He's injured at the minute, but he's one to watch out for. 19 and 18-year-olds there. So they might come good for them. But yeah, I think Helstrup is obviously very good tactically. We know that in terms of the results and the metrics. And he's got a reputation for developing players as well. So when you've got that sort of managerial setup in place, then you're usually going to overachieve.
Yeah, and I think I can't remember who we had on the show once who talked about sort of getting boats and having to get like 3 different boats and then a ferry and then a coach and then a plane to get to Tromsø. I mean, it's that far in terms of its location. It's a tough place to go. Maybe, I mean, wet and windy night in Stoke. I think wet and cold night in the most northern part of Norway, in the middle of the Arctic Circle or whatever. It can't be too easy, can it, Steve? But you've got them to finish, as you say, they're in 9th place, which the fans would probably take, wouldn't they? So
yeah,
I think
they would.
I
think they would. You mentioned the home record. They only lost twice at home last season, and Molde were one of those teams that beat them there. So it's a really tough place to go. And sometimes I don't think it actually has suited them. The weather they get up there, snow sometimes, certainly into the back end of the season, sometimes at the start of the season. They've actually renamed their stadium from Alfheim Stadium to the Tromsø Arena. Now, this is a recent story that's been coming out, and it's to do with the native name language up there. Obviously, it's very close to the Finnish border, Lapland sort of area in the Arctic Circle. I'm not an expert in this part of the world, Jonathan. I'd love to go up there one day, see the Northern Lights, but it sounds like this rename of the stadium is very much it's been applauded. It's come across well, and I think Tromsø's time might come at some point in the next few years. I hope they do well. Maybe they could, they were unlucky in the Norwegian Cup quarter-final against Lillestrøm. It would have been really interesting if they got through that. It would have been Bodø Glimt against Tromsø in a semi-final, which would have been incredibly tasty, wouldn't it? I've always had a soft spot for teams right in the north of Norway, and I hope they have a good year. I think they can have a solid year, and I think they can surprise people with how solid they're going to be defensively.
The North shall rise again, as a certain famous TV series once said, although technically speaking, I suppose the North has been on top for the last few years, apart from the season just gone, but different North, 2 rivals up there, Bodø Glimt and Tromsø, but 9th place, which is a season that Tromsø fans maybe happy with. I think it's to do with the Yeah, I think that was really well received, wasn't it, from Tromsø fans renaming the stadium. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in weeks to come, because that was a really sort of feel-good story that got a lot of
It did.
traction on Twitter as well, I saw. In 10th place, Steve, you've got a team that are kind of fairly close to my heart over the past few seasons. I've liked some of the way they've done things. There's two teams maybe that will probably be on my list, but this is one of them. So take it away. Well, the other team went down, didn't they? So, Christiansen. But yeah.
Yeah, this is I've got odd BK in 10th place, and another tough team to predict. To be honest, this is one of those, I wish I could have like a skip button and move to the next team, Jonathan, because I always struggle talking about them. I don't know why. I can just never get a feel for this club, this team too much. They did have a very good season last year, though, of course, in 5th place. Bloody hell. Just like look back at the table. They finished 5th last year. Like, how did that happen? They've got a negative goal difference as well, and they finished 5th. I can't see them replicating that, and I think the only way is down this year. It's a question of how far down. Fair play to the manager, Paco Johansson, obviously did very well, but there was a point during the season we were talking about them as potential relegation candidates, because they were a bit like Sarpsborg. Actually, they were lurking above danger with, say, a dozen games to go, and then they had a really good last third of the campaign. So tricky side. I think they were one of the teams that did overachieve their metrics at both ends of the field in terms of goals expected, goals and goals against. Certainly defensively, anyway. 1.79 XGA, and it was only 1.5 conceded. So I think that's something to watch out for. And a big reason for that, though, is the goalkeeper, Leopold Wallstedt, who's the best player in the squad for me. One of the best keepers in the league. They've done incredibly well to keep him. He's got 1 year left on his contract. I can see what he's trying to do. He just wants probably to see it out, and then he's got his free reign of options, hasn't he, at the end of the season? He's not going to lack for potential attractions, but with him in between the sticks, he will produce saves that you are like, bloody hell, how on earth did he keep that out? And that's the sort of goalkeeper he is. He's definitely the one, the key man in this squad for me. The rest of it, there's the sprinklings, isn't there? You got 39-year-old Espen Ruud, who's still going on strong. I mean, his legs are going to give way at some point, aren't they? But he's still good from set piece situations. The squad is a bit thin on the ground. I do sometimes worry where the goals are going to come from. They're going to hope that Ole Erik Midtskogen comes good for them. Signed him from, I think, Tier 3, Chelsea, the side. Scored a lot of goals at that level, £100,000. Can he do that at Eliteserien level? Not sure. Midfield's got Philip Jorgensen, who I think is going to get a big move away from the club eventually, maybe this summer. Difficult side. I mean, 1 week they're sort of side. 1 week they can be anything. The next week they're sort of the opposite. So I've put them in 10th place. What's their ceiling? Probably 7th. What's their cellar? Relegation.
Yeah, it's hard to predict. Potentially, maybe you had them last season in 8th actually, and they did okay. They came 5th. I mean, for you, Steve, is Leopold Wallstedt the biggest differential in the league, in the sense of if he was to be injured for a period, could that be the biggest difference maker compared to any other team in the league losing a key player, in your opinion? And also, do you think he'll see out his contract, or do you think someone's actually going to come in for him and pay a bit of money? Odd might just sell him, take a bit of money in the summer.
I think it's strange that he rejected a move to Bodø Glimt, because I think that would have been a really good move for him at this point in his career. But he did say he fancies a move to sort of mainstream Europe. Quite when that happens, let's see. I mean, it's not the worst time to move, is it, in the mid-season of Norway? So he could move on. But yeah, look, those metrics of overachievement in terms of expected goals against, I think he's the main reason why. And if he did go down, they're relying on someone called Pedar Nygaard Clausen. I mean, who's he? No offense, but I don't think I've ever seen him play. 20-year-old.
Might try and get him on the show, and
maybe he's quite good.
He might be like, who's Steve Wyss? He'll be like, who's Steve Wyss?
We've all been there, though, haven't we? We look at who the backup goalkeeper is, and it's often a youngster sometimes, and sometimes they're terrible, and sometimes they're actually quite good. But if he suddenly had to start games regularly, I think you're right. I mean, you certainly couldn't expect him to be as good as Wallstedt, could you? So that, it would be a massive downgrade for them. So, but Johansson's a good manager. He came in with a good reputation. He did well at times, but there were other periods last season where they just looked terrible. So it's like, what version of odd BK is going to show up? And they lost in the Norwegian Cup the last 16, I think it was, to Sandefjord. I think it's like 4-0. And they were 4-0 down at half time. I mean, I know that was a month ago now, but that's a concern for me. Things like that. So, if things start to go pear-shaped, they could end up getting sucked into a battle at the bottom. It's one of those years where I don't think, any 10 teams might not be safe. It's such a competitive league this year, as we'll talk about. But they're a difficult side. There's still some good youngsters to look out for. I can never get a good grip on this club and this team. I've got to be honest.
Yeah, you've done. I mean, in terms of, you said you could barely speak about them. You've given it a good effort there. I think so. Fair play to you. I think sometimes teams like that have a really good year, and then it's a bit of a down year, isn't it? They'll probably they might even take 10th. Who knows? But I think we're going to move on to the relegation battle now, and there's 6 teams. We could, maybe not bunch together necessarily, but it seems like you sort of predicting similar to the Premier League at the moment. You kind of you're predicting a squeaky bum time in the Itinerary relegation. You think there's going to be a bunch of teams that could potentially go down. Let's start with where you think. I mean, do you want to start with the teams that go down, or do you want to start 11th place?
I think we'll go downwards on this particular thing. But you're totally right what you say there, Jonathan. I think what the Premier League's like at the minute. We might get something very similar in Norway, because in the past there's always been obvious candidates to finish bottom or in the bottom 2. It's not always happened. Look at Ranheim, for example, that year. I think they finished 5th or 6th. Obviously, they went down the year after. But I look at the teams on paper. There's not an obvious team that I'm going to say, they're going to be rock bottom. Nothing stands out to me. Now, of course, there will be a team that gets cast adrift eventually. Just the way football is. But it might be a team we don't expect, like Kristiansand last year, for example. But the way I see it, I think it's one of the hardest, most competitive years in Eliteserien. And, and every league has this, Jonathan, where certain teams sort of just stay afloat. They tread water, you know what I mean? And they always do enough to survive fairly comfortably, because there's always 2 or 3 worse. This is not a season to have one of them sort of down years where you're below par, because you will go down. It's as simple as that. And so, it's one of those where you can make a case for maybe 6 to 8 teams to potentially get sucked in and go down in this relegation battle.
Yeah, I think any team mentioned from now to the end of this show, maybe you're on red alert, basically. Danger, high voltage. So you can obviously deduct who's left. So let's go one by one, Steve, towards the trapdoor. And you're going to start with, who are you starting with? It's a team that begins with S.
Yeah,
there's 3 of them.
So this is like this is like the Basement Jack section. Red alert. Remember that song?
Yeah. It's the countdown now, you know what I mean?
It certainly is. We're going with Stabaek in 11th place, Jonathan. Newly promoted side. And if you'd asked me this sort of in December, I probably would have had them to go down straight again. But I actually really like the business they've done. We've actually got an interview coming up as well on the Nordic Football Podcast with one of the assistant managers at the club. So I had a good chat with him. And, of course, he's going to make it sound like things are going well. But genuinely, you could feel that things are going in the right direction with Stabaek. Let's talk about the one negative for them. They've lost a player called Gift Emmanuel Orban, who is absolutely firing goals in for fun for Ghent in Belgium right now, isn't he? He's this Nigerian wonder kid, the next Victor Osimhen. 16 goals for him last season, 7 assists in 19 appearances. So that's a big loss, no doubt about it. Obviously, you can see why he tore up the Obost again. But they've replaced him really well, I think, with Mushaga Bakenga, who, we've talked about him on this podcast before. He's had a stint in Asia. It didn't work out. But he's a proven scorer at this level. Kasper Wartz-Ho on loan from Aalborg. It looks like a good strike duo that can get goals. They've got Lars Bohinen in charge. He still hasn't lost a competitive game since he took charge of Stabaek 2/3 of the way through last season.
He's a good manager, isn't he, for this level? Do you think?
Yeah, I do. I think there was a time when Lars Bohinen was sort of, he always got sides out of the Obos, but he couldn't keep them in Eliteserien. But he's evolved as a manager. And the stint he had at Sarpsborg impressed me. I thought they were a bit harsh not to keep him on. I think maybe there was a few disagreements behind the scenes, not football related. So it didn't surprise me Stabaek snapped him up last season. 3-5-2 system that he plays. Defensively a lot more sound than he ever used to be. And I don't think they're going to be easy to break down at all. They knocked Molde out of the Norwegian Cup on penalties in a 1-1 draw, but it was a legitimate 1-1 draw. Most ridiculous penalty shootout you've seen for a long time, mate. It went all the way through to penalty number 13. Both goalkeepers were involved and scored from the spot. And I'm going to talk about a goalkeeper to start things off because they signed Isak Pettersen from Toulouse on a free transfer, former Norrköping player, former Allsvenskan goalkeeper of the season. Great signing. He replaces Marcus Sandberg, who was great for them last year in Obos, but I think Pettersen's actually an upgrade. Isak Pettersen, 25-year-old, coming into his prime, saw some of his saves in that shootout. He's maybe one of the reasons they've got to that semi-final. So a brilliant addition there. They've got a lot of depth in all areas of the squad. And, with Stabaek, known for famed academy, there's always youngsters chomping at the bit. A 15-year-old came off the bench against Molde in the cup match. I mean, that in itself is absolutely remarkable. Philip Jensen Rieser is his name. And, that just sums this club up. And I think the actual quality on paper is better than some might think, they're going to be a massive candidate to go down. But I think they can maybe have quite a little bit more about them and stay afloat with a little bit of comfort.
Yeah, I love that. And Pettersen, I mean, that is, like you say, that I think that's a bit of, free transfer. So it must be a drop in wages from Toulouse, to be honest, playing in Ligue 1. Never really sort of made it there, did he, in the end? But he's a quality keeper and still a good age. He could well get another move, actually, I think. So
definitely.
Great signing there. So you got Stabaek safe. That's 1 down, 5 to go. So they're in the clear. Who's next to your trapdoor? 12th place.
Yeah, and as I say, just before we move on, I think the defence can be a reason why they're in the clear. Like, good goalkeeper. 4.5 million on fantasy, by the way. You could do a lot worse than adding Isak Pettersen, in addition to a couple of strikers who can get them goals. So moving on to the next team, I've got Strømsgodset in 12th. Interesting side. The only team that have changed their manager in the off-season. They've got rid of Hakon, what was his name? I've forgotten. It was a managerial duo, which I need to actually check. Bjørn Petter Ingebrigtsen and Hakon Wiebelund. Ingebrigtsen has actually moved into a consultancy role at Mjøndalen. They're bitter rivals, it suggests that when it was mutual consent was the departure, but maybe there's a little bit more to it than that if he's moved to Mjøndalen after this. But they brought in a bloke called Jørgen Isnes, who was the manager of K from Oslo in Obos Ligaen for 6 years, I do believe. Couldn't quite bring them up. Now, I've heard a lot of good things said about K from Oslo. Down last season, they were an over magnet for bettors betting on the Obos. I think every game bar 3 of their fixtures finished with over 2.5 goals. Isnes is going to completely change the system here at Godset from a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 to a 3-4-3. So a big tactical overhaul. And there's a lot of question marks about Godset. I don't know what to expect from them long term. Are they going to be sort of teething problems with this new system? Are they going to hit the ground running straight away? Let's see. Isnes is a bit of a character. He's worth following on Twitter. He will say a few controversial comments. He's manages to watch out for, Jonathan. 43-year-old. He's got a bit about something about him. I think I could see him maybe on the Nordic Football podcast one day. I feel like maybe me and him would get along quite well.
Get him on, mate. Get him on.
So, yeah, it's an interesting team. There is some youngsters. There's some experience. I don't know what direction they're going to go in. I think they'll stay up. I put them down in 12th because I just think it's such a competitive league, and it's a big ask for a team to suddenly change its complete tactical direction, Jonathan.
Not much transfer business, only 4 signings, I think, and that's not much for comparatively. but they've lost Johan Hove to Groningen for €1 million. Is that going to be a big loss?
Big loss, yeah, because I don't really think they've not replaced him. Herman Stengel's going to be their key player, midfielder. Everything runs through him, and he's on the set pieces. Technically excellent player. So if he went down injured, they're in trouble in midfield, in my opinion. So yeah, key player there. But yeah, fundamentally they've not replaced Hover. But the change of formation means they might probably not need a player like that, if you know what I mean. There's more of a switch to the wide players now. Like the likes of Thomas Grogard is going to be a wing back rather than a left back. We're going to be having sort of some inverted wingers in there as well. They've got a couple of interesting signings from the Obos, Marcus Menard and Jostein Eklund, who scored goals for Ranheim and Sandnes. 25-year-old. It feels like the good age to move up to Eliteserien and test yourself. He's brought in one of his players from Oslo in defence, 24-year-old Fredrik Christensen Dahl. Heard good things about him. It feels like a good time to move up to this level. But again, you're changing systems. A lot can go wrong. I think there's a lot expecting goals from Jonathan Braut-Bruns this year. Yeah. They signed him last season. He's a popular fantasy pick. Again, most of his best stats and goals are in Obos. So
good stuff. Yeah, sounds like you think they are going to be safe. We got one team left that's guaranteed safety in this league, Steve. So we'll move to 13th. We've got 4 teams, by the way, left: Aalesund, Haugesund, HamKam, and Sandefjord. That's in alphabetical order, I think. Well, except for the H's. Who have you got in the one final safe position out of those 4 teams?
I'm going with Aalesund in this position in 13th place. I think they're going to be quite a boring team. These are not. They're not going to excite you too much, Jonathan. Aalesund, I'm afraid. This is a team that did enough to survive last year. I think they'll be defensively sound. They've got a very experienced manager. And I was really, really worrying where the goals are going to come from. But they made a late addition in the transfer window, which is, I think I would have predicted them in the bottom 3 if they'd not signed Isaac Atanga from Cincinnati for $300,000. He actually doesn't have a great scoring record in MLS, which that's concerning, isn't it? I think there's times in the last decade me or you would fancy scoring goals in that league. However, everywhere you go, there's a lot of great opinions about Isaac Atanga. He's got something about him. He's got flair. He impressed on his debut in the friendly. And, he can play any position in the attack. And he might just hit the ground running and be an X factor for them. He might even be so good that they lose him in the summer. Who knows? He might be terrible.
His market value is $2 million on Transfermarkt. So to get him for that price is, at least on the face of it, is a bargain, isn't it?
I think this signing is either going to be one of the best signings of the year or a flop of the year. I just don't know which way it's going to go. But is he your new Fofana, basically? Is he the new sort of target man? Well, they had to do something. They've also brought in a Senegalese big lad, by the way, Mokhtar Diop, 18-year-old, worth another late addition. And this fella is apparently a monster. Like he can eat up defenses physically. So you might got sort of him combined with Atanga could really work well. But let's see. If Atanga's going to get the goals for them or Diop's going to get the goals for them, because they had to do something. Moses Abi is nowhere near reliable enough up front, and all of their other attacking options are just not good enough, in my opinion. But they've saved themselves literally on deadline day or in the build-up to deadline day to change my mind about that they might have the goals in them to survive, because they will be defensively compact. Lars-Arne Nielsen, experienced manager, he will dig in if needed and play ugly football. So I think you're going to see probably a 3-4-3 formation. Don't expect that many goals with Aalesund, but that gives them a bit of a solid foundation, combined with these 2 lads in attack who may well surprise. So I'm just giving them the edge to avoid any sort of relegation, but they're going to be in the mixer.
So Aalesund in 13th. Those are the teams who will be in Eliteserien in 2024, according to Meatman Soccer. But there's 3 teams now who aren't guaranteed, and I know a certain recent guest of the show who might, at this point, be a little bit concerned about your predictions. So let's move on to the team that you have in 14th, which of course is the relegation playoff. Steve.
Yeah, the team that I am predicting in 14th is the team that I've seen most predict to finish rock bottom this season, and that is HamCam. And I'm a little bit surprised that so many out there are putting 16th on their card, because I certainly don't think they're an obvious candidate to be bottom. But having said that, I think it will be a tough year for them. It's their second season back in the Eliteserien. They finished 13th last year, so only just above the drop in terms of position. Second season can be really hard, can't it? Because teams can figure you out a little bit. And they've lost 2 or 3 players of significance. They don't have many goals in them, and that it always concerns me when teams don't have goals in them, Jonathan. That's just me. 33 goals scored last season. And I do wonder, unlike Aalesund, who look like they might have a couple of players who could be the X factor, I'm not sure where HamCam are getting their goals from. They brought in Rasmus Wiedersheim-Paul from Rosenborg on loan. Now, I actually think he's got something about him. One day I think he will have a season where he just explodes. But he always seems to get loans to crap offensive teams. Do you know what I mean? I feel sorry for him. If he put him in a team that just constantly attacked and created loads of chances, I think he'd do really well. But he's going to have to work really hard at HamCam because they're just not naturally that great going forward. Henrik Udal comes in from Vålerenga. Not a bad signing, actually. I feel like he was underused there, really. Yeah, they might go okay. Yeah, go on.
I mean, they signed one player, Wiedersheim-Paul, isn't it, from Sweden as well. We talked about him on the Allsvenskan podcast, didn't we? When I said he never really quite sort of shone there. He's on loan from Rosenborg. Yeah, he never really quite shone at Rosenborg as well. He's obviously been at Värnamo and Mjällby as well for a bit, and Helsingborg. You've mentioned other players there, including him. So what is it that you think makes them just have the edge on maybe a few other teams?
Defense and coaching. They do have good defensive metrics from last season. They didn't concede that many goals. And they will adapt themselves. We heard in the Tom Dent interview last year that they are willing to adapt to other teams and make life difficult. They don't play just one way. And I think that can be a good thing for them. I do think they're well coached. Jakob Mikkelsen is well, highly respected. I think the whole coaching setup, I had a good chat with Tom last year, and it does seem very good. And you can't underestimate that. That can get you points, They know how to get themselves some points out of games. They'll take the draw if needed. I'm not, I'm not a man for draws, but I think it has worked for HamCam. But I do worry about them losing some key players like Vettel Sharvik, Hassan Kurike, Björlo as well. So he's gone. So that's a big loss, I think, for HamCam. So and the pre-season results haven't been great. There hasn't been a great feel about that. You almost got to forget about results sometimes. So I can see why some are predicting to go down, but I don't think they're going to be that bad. They can be defensively solid enough. And Marcus Sandberg is a really good signing in goal, by the way. Marcus Sandberg was the top keeper in Obos last year. Stabaek have obviously moved on from him because they've upgraded, but I think he can do well. So I think they've got enough defense about them, enough sort of grit and tactical nous. But I do worry where the goal is going to come from for HamCam.
Great stuff. So that is them in the relegation playoff, 50-50. Will they be in the league next year or not? We will know. Who knows? In terms of Tom, you referenced Tom Dent there. Anyone who's listening, he was on a recent episode. So if you go back through the archives, he was on, I think, if you go back 2 or 3 episodes, he was on, and he's the HamCam assistant manager, of course, one of the assistant coaches there. And he gave a lot of insight into the club, so you can get all the insight you need from there. And it leaves 2 teams, Sandefjord and Haugesund, Steve, 15th and 16th. So you've got both to go down. Who have you got rock bottom, and why are these 2 teams going down?
I'm going Sandefjord 15th. I'm going Haugesund in 16th. Now, Sandefjord actually, I actually quite like them. This might sound a weird thing to say in 15th. I think but they could be a real surprise. Certainly in the first third of the season, I think they come out of the traps quite well. They've signed some interesting attackers. Jacob Dunsby, Danilo Al-Said are players worth watching out for. We know Alexander Ruud Taveta has a habit of scoring goals. Really going to be good on the counter-attack. They're going to surprise a few teams like that. They've been working strongly on their defence in the off-season, and their defence was shambolic last year, statistically. And supposedly they've fixed a few problems, but I just wonder if, it will rear its ugly head again as the season progresses. I think they're the sort of team that might get worse as the season goes on. They do welcome back a few players from injury. Last year, who missed a lot of significant minutes. There's been quite a lot of player turnaround. And I think if it wasn't such a strong Eliteserien, if there were sort of 2 or 3 obvious teams to go, I'd say Sandefjord would be all right. It's just one of them years where, it's such a strong league that I've got to predict 2 teams to go. And they're just unfortunately one of them where, statistically and logically, maybe they revert to the terrible form they had at the back end of last season. And at long term, I think they'll struggle. But I think they can come out the traps well and get a few points early on.
And Haugesund, I mean, it pains me to see this. They're a team I was sort of fond of at a certain point over the years, but to be honest, I kind of went off of them. They became a little bit boring for me. Like they have been a little bit they haven't had too many mentions in the last few years on this podcast. Obviously, Sandefjord were 14th last season, survived the relegation playoff. Haugesund last season were 10th. But you think they're going to drop all the way from 10th, Steve, to bottom of the table? Yeah,
and I feel like this might be coming for a few years. I thought it was going to happen last year when they started so badly. But I just feel like they've been treading water now. Since the season they did qualify for Europe, they've been on a downward spiral. I mean, what is Haugesund? What is good for Haugesund? I mean, I'll be interested to know, any fans listening, what is a good outcome for them this season? Survival, I guess. But the squad is always quite thin. That is an issue. They've lost their best player from last season, Christos Zafiris, who went to one of the Prague clubs. They got good money for him, but that's a big, big loss. I've always felt with this team, they're 2 or 3 injuries away from really suffering. And we saw last season this, in the first sort of 7 or 8 games, they did have some injuries like Martin Samuelsson, a few others, and the results weren't there. And they finally had a more clean bill of health, and they managed to drag themselves out of danger. If that happens again, I'm not sure they'll be so lucky. And I just feel like they could struggle early on and really, in a normal season where if there was really 2 candidates that were so poor, then maybe be all right. But it's such a strong league that they need. I just got a bad feeling about them, Jonathan. I might be completely wrong here. Again, I've got to predict 2 teams to go down. It's been really hard to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they've lost Christos Zafiris, 19-year-old, 2.6 million euros. That's decent money to come in. Oscar Krusnell's come from Bromma Poikina, 24-year-old left back. He's okay. Can he be a difference maker? I'm not entirely sure. They've signed Diarra, as you mentioned there, from Petrolul. It just seems like maybe, like you said, I mean, I found them quite boring over the last couple of seasons. I've got to be totally honest. Even the games I've watched since my man Bruno Leite left, although he's back there now. He's back, but I don't think he's going to save them. I mean, one player, just from my point of view, that I mean, they got Soderlund, who's 35 now. One player I might look at just to keep an eye on is Adrio and Pajaziti. I think he's been given the number 10 shot. He's on loan from. Is he on loan from Fulham? On loan from Fulham with an option to buy. Yeah, I've heard a few say he might be all right. I've seen him in youth football under 23s level, and he has got a little bit about him. On his day, I remember him with Fabio. Is it Fabio Carvalho who went to Liverpool? They used to connect quite well for the youth teams. But you never know, isn't it? It's a sort of left field move, really. But you think they will be relegated, so good luck to them. I mean, Haugesund fans. Get in touch. Even Justine Grinhow, get in touch if you want to come on the show. I just think they lack overall quality everywhere. They're not bad. No one's going to be cast adrift here, Jonathan. That's, in my opinion. I think it's going to be one of them years where it's going to be really tight relegation battle, and they may well prove me wrong. If they finish mid-table, am I going to be shocked? No, I'm not. It's just I feel like they've been sort of just treading water for a while, and this is a down year, and this is not a year to have a down year. So good luck to everyone. For those who are predicted not so high, go out there and prove me wrong. Absolutely do it.
So, it's one of those years where it's going to be so tough. Every point matters.
Yeah, you think it could be literally sort of 2 or 3 points separating three or four teams, essentially. And just final question on terms of the relegation battle and that bottom sort of 5 or 6. You've got Stabaek, Godset, Aalesund, HamKam, Sandefjord, Haugesund. If you were to pick 2 players from any of those teams, just 2 for your fantasy team, who would you sort of like immediately come to mind that you'd pick?
I think maybe
a little bit on the spot, but
Yeah, maybe you could gamble on Jonathan Bratbrun. 7.5 million for a striker who's going to be starting regularly for Godset is worth looking at. I am actually tempted to start the season with one of these Sandefjord wingers, the new players, but they're a little bit overpriced. Al Said and Dunsby do interest me because I've got the feeling they could be a pleasant surprise. But at 6.5 million and 6 million, they're actually classed as midfielders, but they're going to be out on the wing and a threat. So maybe you could look at Sandefjord in the first few games, and they come out of the traps okay.
Lovely stuff. We've dropped the code. Obviously, we'll drop it again on Twitter. But Mr. Meatman, that's 2 solid hours. Every single team in the league predicted. Pat yourself on the back, my friend. Some fantastic analysis, players to watch, manager analysis. Let me run through the league for you. You can rest your voice. 16th place, you've got Haugesund. 15th, you've got Sandefjord. 14th, HamKam in the relegation playoff. 13th, Aalesund. 12th, Strømsgodset. 11th, Stabaek. 10th, Odd. 9th, Tromsø. 8th, Viking, mid-table. Sarpsborg, top 7. Brann in 6th, newly promoted side. Vålerenga in 5th. Rosenborg, 4th. Lillestrøm, 3rd. Bodø Glimt, 2nd. And you've got Molde to retain their title as champions of Norway this season. You're comfortable with that? And if you have listened to the whole show, and obviously you're listening now, tweet us on Twitter at NordicFootPod. Let us know what you think. You can also find Steve on Twitter at MeatmanSoccer. You can find me at JFFootball, JFFUTBOL, if you want to make some comments. And also the YouTube channel, as I mentioned, we'll have it sort of timestamped so you can listen to pretty much, you can click on each team for, well, if you've listened to it that way, then you've already listened to the show. But if not, you know what I mean? It will be timestamped in terms of the episode. And if you haven't listened to the Allsvenskan season preview yet as well, they're timestamped team by team. But well done, Mr. Meatman. You comfortable with that?
I'm going to have to be, aren't I? I've put my neck on the block now. Thank you very much for hosting, Jonathan, as always. And for you listeners, appreciate your support. Do leave all your feedback. Tell us what your predictions are. Tell me where I'm wrong and tell me where I'm right as well. So,
and just for those listening, I mean, most people will know who've listened this far, but when does the league start?
Easter Monday, the 9th of April.
And is there a sort of tie of the round?
10th of April, sorry. 10th of April.
Is there a sort of tie of the round that we should look forward to?
I think the 2 matches that stand out is the early game, which is Rosenborg against Viking, which is always quite a tasty clash between 2 big rivals. And then the last game on the day, everyone's going to be in anticipation to see just how good this Brann side is. Brann against Haugesund. Everyone's expecting them to whitewash them. Just imagine if Haugesund went there and won first game. I mean,
there you go. Could be a good clash. So yeah, thanks so much for listening to the show. I know it's a mammoth episode, but we're going to give due diligence to each team, and it's only fair. So that's why. So we'll wrap it up. Congratulations, Steve. Well done.
Yeah, brilliant, Jonathan. Thank you very much indeed for listening. We'll be back again soon for some more episodes. Stay tuned for some great content from the Nordic Football Podcast in the next few weeks. But from this edition, it's goodbye from me. Stay safe. Take care. See you next time.
Take care, everyone. See you soon.